Chapter 2201. Nietian narrowed his eyes and couldn't help but look at the dozen figures behind Yi Qinxiang. These black-robed cultivators wore Azura masks, and their auras were powerful and brimming with killing intent. They're all late-stage paramount gods. Very good. Nietian's mouth twitched as he scanned them with his divine sense. The people behind Yi Qinxiang were all late-stage paramount gods, which meant that they were abiding by the rules of the game. However, Nietian could sense that these Azura warriors were far more powerful than ordinary late paramount gods. Each and every one of them possessed battle prowess that rivaled that of a peak paramount god. Nietian, I heard that you're the Azura king of the dark Azura field, Yi Qinxiang said with a cold laugh. Suddenly, Yi Qinxiang sneered and said, the 13 martial artists in front of you were once Azura kings. I like to see just how strong an Azura king like you is. Nietian's expression flickered when he heard Yi Qinxiang's words. No wonder these Azura cultivators' auras were so strong. They used to be Azura kings of the dark Azura field. Nietian had challenged an Azura king before, so he naturally knew how difficult it was to obtain that title. Those who could become Azura kings were martial arts geniuses that were one in a million. It seemed that Yi Qinxiang was not only arrogant, but also cautious. He didn't dare to attack Nietian directly, so he sent out the 13 Azura kings to test Nietian's battle prowess first. After all, Nietian had just killed the sect master of the Blue Dragon sect. Yi Qinxiang might be arrogant, but he knew his own limits. He knew that he wasn't as strong as Sect Master Blue Dragon. He guessed that the power that Nietian had used to kill Sect Master Blue Dragon wasn't his own strength. However, he couldn't test Yi Qinxiang himself, so he sent out the 13 Azura kings first. Impudent. However, right at that moment, a furious roar echoed out as a figure appeared beside Nietian. It was none other than the sect master of the Divine Wind sect, Ouyang Chuan. Nietian's gaze swept over Ouyang Chuan. The latter's aura had already stabilized, and the injuries on his body had more or less recovered. Just now, after Ouyang Chuan had obtained the rheumatism jade, he had secretly absorbed the power of rheumatism. The seven evils' cold power in his body was suppressed, so his strength had almost recovered. At this moment, when he saw someone trying to kill Nietian, he naturally wouldn't stand idly by. He saw limitless potential in Nietian. His intuition told him that befriending Nietian was a wise decision. Nietian is this sect master's friend. How dare you guys try to kill him in front of this sect master? Ouyang Chuan's cold gaze swept across Yi Qinxiang and the others. He said solemnly, do you think I'm just a decoration? Oh, a strong one has come out. When Yi Qinxiang saw Ouyang Chuan, she frowned slightly, but her expression was extremely disdainful. Divine Wind Sect Master, right? Do you know who this princess is? Yin Xinyue's voice sounded, revealing undisguised contempt. You're the eldest princess of the Yingyue Empire, Yin Xinyue. Ouyang Chuan smiled cold. This sect master knows that your Yingyue Empire is a top force in the abandoned land. But this is the Burial Cloud mountain range. Although the Yingyue Empire is strong, it can't control this place. Ouyang Chuan certainly knew who Yin Xinyue was, and he was very clear about the Yingyue Empire's strength. But he felt that it was worth it to offend the Yingyue Empire for Nietian. The Yingyue Empire's sphere of influence could not touch the Burial Cloud mountain range at all. Ouyang Chuan believed that as long as he did not kill Yin Xinyue and the others, the Yingyue Empire would not make an enemy of him. He only wanted to save Nietian and would not really make a move against Yin Xinyue and the others. Divine Wind Sect Master, it seems that you want to intervene in this matter. Yin Xinyue's beautiful eyes trembled as she spoke in a cold tone. The threat was very obvious. No need to talk nonsense with him. At this moment, Yi Qinxiang suddenly sneered and took a step forward. She stared coldly at Ouyang Chuan and said in a deep voice, I'll give you one word. Get lost. Ouyang Chuan's gaze slightly tightened. Obviously, he did not expect Yi Qinxiang to be so arrogant. Sect Master Ouyang. Ouyang Chuan was about to speak, but was stopped by Nietian, who said, This matter has nothing to do with you. You don't need to intervene. Ouyang Chuan was stunned for a moment and looked at Nye Tian with a puzzled expression. He did not expect the latter to suddenly say that. You can leave. Nye Tian did not explain anything, but said cold. Ouyang Chuan looked at Nye Tian with a puzzled expression. Feeling the firmness in the latter's eyes, he thought for a moment and moved to the side. Nye Tian saw Ouyang Chuan retreat and felt a lot more at ease. Ouyang Chuan did not know the situation Nye Tian was facing, so the latter did not want him to get involved in this game. Most importantly, Nye Tian could see that Yi Chenxiang's status was indeed very high. If Ouyang Chuan angered Yi Chenxiang, it would bring a calamity to the Divine Wind sect. Nye Tian appreciated Ouyang Chuan's good intentions, but this battle in front of him could only be resolved by himself. Outsiders could not interfere. Very good. Yi Chenxiang faintly smiled and said darkly, "Now, let the show begin." Nye Tian also smiled and locked his gaze on the 13 Azura Kings. He said in a loud voice, "I also want to see just how strong the 13 Azura Kings are." Yi Chenxiang seemed to be unable to stand Nye Tian's insolence and roared, her eyes flashing with killing intent. "Do it!" In the next moment, the 13 Azura Kings moved together. Their auras merged into one, boundless and mighty, turning into rolling waves that pressed down on Nye Tian. Nye Tian felt a terrifying power pressing down on him. Suddenly, his entire body rose up with a soaring sword momentum. Boom! In the air, the two auras collided, and with a loud boom, Nye Tian was forced to retreat. After all, his opponents were more than 10 late paramount gods, and they were all very talented. Their combined auras were terrifying. Nye Tian could sense that the combined auras of the 13 Azura Kings were strong enough to contend with Sect Lord Blue Dragon. Yi Chenxiang was taken aback as she looked at Nye Tian. This kid's strength is indeed strange. He had never imagined that Nye Tian's aura would be able to stand up to the 13 Azura Kings at the same time. When the 13 Azura Kings attacked together, even he would find it difficult to deal with them. But Nye Tian seemed to be able to deal with them with ease. It was obvious how strong he was. The crowd's eyes widened. It seemed that the battle in front of them was even more exciting than they had anticipated. Die! At that moment, the 13 Azura Kings let out bellows at the same time. Immediately afterwards, they sprang into action, unleashing countless violent attacks towards Nye Tian. Danger! In the blink of an eye, Nye Tian sensed danger. Black magical symbols flickered around him, and his aura skyrocketed. In the next moment, boundless astral power surged out of him. Astral soul armor, astral soul shield, astral soul wings, and astral soul flame appeared at the same time. Chapter 2202. Nye Tian hovered there in midair, unleashing his astral heaven-cleaving sword image, which radiated dazzling sword light that shot out 10,000 meters in all directions. In that moment, it was as if a star had fallen from the sky, causing the entire sky to shine brightly. So strong. When the crowd saw this, their eyes trembled and they exclaimed in surprise. None of them could ever have guessed that Nye Tian, who was only a peak-over god, would be able to unleash such terrifying power. Just what is in this kid's body that can instantly increase his strength by nearly an entire realm? Yi Chenxiang thought, looking at Nye Tian from a distance. She could sense that he was now a late paramount god. It was a completely bizarre sight. If she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, she would never have believed that something so terrifying could exist in the world. Boom! Bam! 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 Right at this moment, the Starlight Sword Shadow was like a huge dragon. The sword light suddenly bloomed, and countless attacks landed on the sword shadow, causing a dull sound. The astral heaven-cleaving sword image finally couldn't hold on any longer and shattered, sending out waves of sword will and astral power in all directions. Nye Tian felt a strong force coming at him. With a flap of his wings, he retreated to 1,000 meters away. But at this time, the 13 Azura Kings were actually directly pressing towards him. In a head-on clash, Nye Tian was clearly at a disadvantage. A martial artist who can become an Azura King is indeed not simple, Nietian thought to himself. At the same time, he became even more cautious. Die! Immediately afterwards, the 13 Azura kings let out fierce roars and launched attacks at the same time. Violent power crashed down from the sky towards Nietian. Nietian relied on his astral soul wings to move with incredible speed, dodging all of the incoming attacks. Bam! 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 However, the 13 Azura kings worked together seamlessly. Even though Nietian was incredibly fast, he couldn't dodge all of the attacks, and his astral soul shield was hit in quick succession. Damnation! When Nietian saw the cracks on his astral soul shield, his expression darkened. The 13 Azura kings were clearly cultivators who had cultivated together and had a tacit understanding of each other. Die! 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 Grim battle cries echoed out as the 13 Azura kings appeared in front of Nietian one after another like phantoms. Bam! 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 A series of muffled sounds rang out, and Nietian staggered backward, completely powerless to fight back. Die! Just at this moment, a low and deep roar rang out. Soon after, a ghostly claw shadow appeared in the sky. Like a mountain, it suddenly descended. Boom! A loud boom echoed out as Nietian's star soul shield shattered into pieces. Nietian flew backward, and the wings on his back fluttered to stabilize himself. However, blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, and his face was pale. The teamwork of these 13 people is simply too seamless. Nietian's eyes narrowed as he looked at the 13 figures not far away from him. His expression was extremely ugly. He hadn't expected the 13 Azura kings to be so powerful. Nietian, you've truly amazed this prince, but how long can you last against the 13 Azura kings? Yi Qianxiang looked at Nietian from afar, a sinister smile on his lips. At this moment, even he had to admit that Nietian was a terrifying, abnormal person. To be able to fight against the 13 Azura kings alone, and still last until now, was truly amazing. But unfortunately, Nietian was already at a disadvantage, and it was clear that he was going to lose. Yi Qianxiang knew that once the 13 Azura kings gained an advantage, they would constantly expand it. As far as he was concerned, Nietian was dead for sure. The only question he had was how long could Nietian hold on? At this time, the fat cat's nervous voice sounded in Nietian's divine sense. Nietian, these 13 have a very tight coordination. You must kill one of them, or it will be very troublesome. Nietian nodded, but his expression was still ugly. Of course, he knew that the 13 Azura kings worked together. He really wanted to kill one of them and destroy their tacit understanding. But now, he was at a complete disadvantage and had no way to fight back. And even more troublesome was that Nietian had already discovered that the 13 Azura kings' auras were constantly rising. It seemed that there was a special connection between the 13, and their auras were fusing with each other, promoting each other, becoming stronger and stronger. The crowd's eyes trembled, as if they were worried about Nietian. Of course, they were not worried about Nietian's safety. They were just worried that if Nietian was killed just like that, this battle would be too boring. Everyone's eyes shone brightly, anticipating Nietian's counterattack. Unparalleled Shadow, Azura Reverse Kill. At this time, one of the Azura warriors suddenly roared, and the 13 Azura kings moved at the same time. Suddenly, thousands of Azuras appeared in the air. Seeing this, Nietian frowned, and his expression darkened. It was obvious that the 13 Azura kings were going to use a killing move. Nietian, it's time to end the game. Yi Qianxiang looked at the thousands of Azuras in the air, and the corners of her mouth twitched. Her eyes became extremely cold, as if Nietian was already a corpse. Nietian, are you finally going to die? Yin Xinyue's eyes were blazing, and his chest heaved up and down. He could not wait to see the scene of Nietian being killed. Kill, 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 kill. In the next moment, a fierce roar sounded in the air, followed by countless echoes. The entire area was filled with Azura figures, and a dark aura enveloped everything. The Azura figures were like sharp arrows that covered the sky, covering the earth and sky, as they charged towards Nietion. Starry Sky Restriction open. At this time, the corners of Nietion's mouth twitched slightly, and the power of stars surged out of his body. The Starry Sky Restriction was instantly activated. Then his body shook and several sword chi burst out his body. Blood chi surged in the air, and the sword intent became bloody and violent. High God Sword Formation activate. A low roar sounded again. An array runes appeared outside Nietion's body, fusing with the sword intent and blood chi. At the same time, his body surged with violent star soul flames. At this moment, Nietion's entire body seemed to have become a sword shadow burning with flames. What is this kid trying to do? Yi Qianxiang looked at Nietion, and her eyes trembled as she exclaimed in her heart. It seemed that Nietion did not choose to escape this time, but to fight the 13 Azura Kings head-on. Fighting against the unparalleled shadow of the 13 Azura Kings, this kid is courting death. Yi Qianxiang immediately saw through Nietion's plan, and she immediately roared, her eyes filled with killing intent. At this moment, Nietion was about to fight the 13 Azura Kings head-on. He could already feel that the 13 Azura Kings' aura was constantly growing stronger, and if he continued to dodge, he would only become more and more passive. Rather than that, he might as well give it his all. Chapter 2203. The Forbidden Astral Space was activated. Nietion's aura surged again. At the same time, the power of the stars around him surged. He was in an extremely violent state. It's you. In the next moment, Nietion's eyes narrowed as he locked onto an Azura. In the forbidden astral space, his perception had increased significantly. He could easily distinguish which Azura were real and which were illusions. At this moment, he locked onto the real body of an Azura. He wanted to kill this person. At that very moment, thousands of Azura phantoms charged towards Nietion at the same time, stirring up raging waves in the void. Facing the tyrannical killing move of the 13 Azura Kings, Nietion did not dodge. The wings on his back shook, and his figure turned into a beam of light as he attacked. High God Sword Formation, God Punisher. In midair, the corners of Nietion's mouth twitched slightly. His eyes surged with the strongest killing intent. Crazy. This brat is simply crazy. Yi Qianxiang saw this scene from the side, her eyes trembling uncontrollably, and she actually cried out in horror. Nietion was courting death by charging straight into the midst of thousands of Azuras. With so many Azura phantoms, the attack power they could unleash was simply unimaginable. However, at this moment, Nietion disregarded everything. His eyes were resolute as he stabbed out with the starry heaven slash. A blood-colored sword shadow whizzed out like a wild beast. The moment it bloomed, the heavens and the earth became solemn, and the space was pulled taut. Bang! 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 In the next moment, countless Azura illusions fell and bombarded the astral soul armor that surrounded Nietion. In the forbidden astral space, the power of the astral soul armor was strengthened to a certain extent. However, it clearly could not withstand so many Azura attacks. In just a blink of an eye, the astral soul armor cracked and collapsed. Immediately afterwards, numerous Azura phantoms landed on Nietion's fleshly body like sharp arrows. Nietion's figure was attacked, but he did not care. The killing intent in his eyes increased. No! Right at this moment, the Azura King that Nietion's gaze had locked on finally sensed danger, and actually cried out in alarm. At this moment, he felt the aura of death approaching. The fear in his heart was magnified infinitely through his eyes. He wanted to escape, but it was too late. Boom! In the void, the crimson sword shadow suddenly fell, and like a mountain crashing down, it bombarded the Azura King. The latter did not even have the time to let out a final scream before he was directly drowned by the sword shadow. For this strike, Nietian used the strongest sword formation in the AO sword tactics, sword formation of Soaring God. At the same time, he had also activated the Star River flight restriction. Coupled with the sword intent that was ignited by his blood chi, its power was unimaginable. The instant the sword shadow fell, the Azura King died a miserable death and turned into a bloody light. Bang, bang, bang. However, at this moment, more Azura figures rushed over, and a terrifying force fell on Nietian's body. His figure swayed, like a broken leaf in a storm, so helpless. In front of him, blood was spurting out, and his blood chi was burning. His entire body was torn open, and one could even vaguely see his white bones. Such serious injuries, if it were on someone else, they would have long lost consciousness. However, Nietian's heart was tough, and his martial body was far more powerful than ordinary people. At this moment, he still maintained his consciousness, and his eyes were firm. One by one, the Azura figures bombarded Nietian's body like sharp arrows. On his body, more and more wounds were torn open, but his figure still stood there. Although he was swaying, he refused to fall. Countless eyes looked at Nietian in shock. They could not imagine how a martial artist could still stand after suffering such serious injuries. Moments later, all the Azura phantoms in the air disappeared. The dozen or so Azura kings hovered in the air, staring at Nietian in shock. They seemed to have forgotten that one of their companions was missing. He's not dead, Yi Qianxiang said, looking over at Nietian. He could see that Nietian was bathed in blood, and yet he was still standing there. Furthermore, his aura was calm and steady, without any signs of disorder. Clearly, Nietian was seriously injured, but he wasn't dead. How could his martial body be so strong? Yi Qianxiang thought, his eyes trembling. Never could he have guessed that Nietian's martial body would be this strong. If that many Azura figures had landed on him, he would have long since been reduced to nothing more than a corpse. Yi Qianxiang was a peak paramount god. However, Nietian's true strength was only that of a peak over god. Freak, Yi Qianxiang thought, his eyes flickering with killing intent. This kid is a freak. Nietian's strength was beyond imagination, and he couldn't keep his cool. He could sense an intense threat from Nietian. Right now, Nietian only had the strength of a peak chief god. If he became a paramount god in the future, wouldn't he be able to contend against a sage? Thinking of this, Yi Qianxiang's charming face suddenly froze. She made up her mind. No matter what, no matter the price, she must kill Nietian. Is this all the 13 Azura kings are capable of? At that moment, Nietian stood high up in the sky and let out a furious roar, his eyes bloodshot and filled with a strong desire to fight. His entire body was covered with bloody wounds, and there wasn't a single part of his body that was intact. He looked like he had just emerged from a river of blood, and he gave off a bloody aura of slaughter. To others, Nietian's injuries were so severe that it was a miracle that he was still standing. But Nietian knew that his injuries weren't as serious as they seemed. To him, they weren't fatal. As his body had fused with the earth vein source, he possessed sufficient life force. As long as he willed it, he would be able to heal all of his wounds in a matter of minutes. But he didn't plan on doing that. After all, he couldn't just let the blood energy go to waste. Just now, he had risked his life to kill an Azura king. Now that one of the 13 Azura kings was gone, the remaining 12 weren't as terrifying as before. Now it was time for Nietian to kill. Is this guy a human or a ghost? The 12 Azura kings finally reacted. One of them let out a cry of horror, and his eyes were filled with terror. These Azura kings had killed countless people, but they had never seen someone as strong as Nietian. So you people can be afraid. The corner of Nietian's mouth curled up, and his eyes were cold. But this is only the beginning. You'll have to be truly afraid now. With that, Nietian's body shook, and the blood aura in his body surged, fusing perfectly with the sword intent around him. Chapter 2204. High up in the sky, Nietian's figure stood majestically as he unleashed his aura once again. He was like a huge, blood-colored sword that stood erect between the heavens and the earth. Even the surrounding space was filled with an intense, bloody aura. Everyone stared at Nietian with flabbergasted expressions on their faces, their hearts filled with astonishment. Is this guy still human? His body suffered such a heavy blow, but he can still release such an aura? This person is too terrifying. What kind of power is hidden in his body? Does this kid have an immortal body? The crowd exclaimed in their hearts. Their eyes were trembling. They would never forget the scene in front of them. Earlier, they had been worried that Nietian would be killed by the 13 Azura kings. Now it seemed that their worries were unnecessary. Nietian's strength and perseverance were beyond their imagination. Next, it was time for Nietian. The 12 Azura kings looked at Nietian in horror. They were speechless. At this time, the sword aura around Nietian became stronger. The sword will in the air became sharper, and the surging blood chi became more violent. The blood-red figure shrouded in the sword aura was like the god of slaughter. His cold eyes were devoid of any emotion. Now enjoy real fear, Nietianling said. His cold voice was like a death knell resounding in the air. The 12 Azura kings suddenly felt the killing intent, which made them feel a bone-piercing chill. Swoosh! Then Nietian moved. The starlight heavenly slashed down. The fiend god sword will bloomed instantly, and the sharp aura was breathtaking. One of the Azura kings didn't have time to react. He was hit by the sword shadow and disappeared. It was a bloody and tragic scene. Run! The other Azura kings trembled when they saw this. The same thought appeared in their minds at the same time. Facing Nietian, they were afraid. At this time, they had completely lost the courage to resist. There was only one thought in their minds: run. In an instant, the 11 Azura kings retreated at the same time, fleeing in different directions. Do you think you're worthy of being called the Azura king with such courage? Nietianling laughed. He certainly wouldn't let these people escape. The wings on his back flapped, and the stench of blood in the air thickened. His silhouette was like a beam of murderous light, sharp and merciless. Bang! 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 The crowd's eyes trembled, and before they could react, they saw clouds of blood mist appearing in the air. Wherever Nietian went, an Azura king would die a miserable death with every swing of his sword. With his blood and chi boiling, coupled with the eruption of the fiend godsword intent, the current Nietian was indeed extremely terrifying. However, this state came at the cost of blood energy and fiend god energy, so it definitely wouldn't last long. If the 12 Azura kings weren't afraid and didn't think about escaping, and instead fought with Nietian head-on, it would be extremely difficult for Nietian to kill them. Unfortunately, these people were too cowardly. Bearing the title of Azura king, they completely lost their composure when death approached. There's still one more. In the blink of an eye, Nietian killed 11 Azura kings. Only one was left, and he fled in panic in the air. A bunch of trash. Just as Nietian was about to make a move, a cold roar rang out in the air. Then, a streak of black light suddenly appeared and attacked the Azura king. Wah! That Azura king didn't have the slightest reaction. He was directly struck by the black light and died a worse death than his companions. Seeing this, Nietian frowned and locked his eyes on the person who attacked. The person who suddenly attacked was none other than Yi Qinxiang. That Azura king had just fled in Yi Qinxiang's direction. He definitely wanted her to save him, but he never expected that she would personally kill him. It had to be said that Yi Qinxiang was indeed a ruthless person. When she was angry, she would even kill her own people. Looks like you're going to do it yourself. Nietian looked at Yi Qinxiang and smiled cold. His eyes revealed deep disdain. Your strength is worthy of this prince's attack. Yi Qinxiang smiled coldly and took a step forward. Black, killing intent surged out of her body like flames, instantly enveloping the space within several thousand meters. Suddenly, the entire world became much dimmer. Barrier! Nietian's eyes darkened. He instantly understood and exclaimed at his heart. At this moment, Fat Cat's voice rang out and reminded Nietian. Nietian, you're not his match now. Leave. Nietian's aura was constantly weakening. His blood chi and demon god power could no longer support his current state. Moreover, his injuries were not light. Even with the protection of the Terra's source, he could not continue fighting. Yi Qinxiang's strength was clearly not something that those Azure Kings could compare to. Her aura contained a strange, killing intent, as if it could devour everything. If Nietian was at his peak, he might be able to fight Yi Qinxiang. But now, he was no match for her. Nietian nodded slightly and suddenly turned around. He looked at the huge mountain of the Thousand Demon Mountain and locked his gaze on the 5th floor's cave number 17. Trying to escape? Yi Qinxiang saw Nietian's actions and roared. Black killing intent instantly blossomed from her body and enveloped Nietian. Oh no! Nietian frowned, and his expression suddenly changed. At this moment, a black light suddenly appeared. It seemed to have appeared out of nowhere and directly attacked Nietian. The black light was like an arrow, cold and murderous. Nietian reacted instantly and tilted his body slightly. But he was still a bit too slow. Pooh! The sound of flesh being cut rang out. His shoulder had been pierced. Damn it! Intense pain spread throughout his body. Nietian roared. He saw that the wound on his shoulder was actually slowly splitting open. The flesh around it was slowly turning black, as if it was withering. What's going on? Nietian's pupils shrank slightly. He could not hide the shock on his face. He had the pterosaurus in his body, and his life chi was strong. This kind of flesh wound should not be fatal to him. Nietian, what you've been hit by is the Yi clan's bloodline power, Dark Night Devour. At this moment, Yi Qinxiang's voice rang out, filled with an extremely cold aura. She laughed wildly and said, "Now, enjoy the despair of your life being devoured bit by bit." Dark Night Devour. The Yi clan's bloodline power contained an extremely violent devouring power. Dark Night Devour could directly devour a cultivator's life chi. Those hit by Dark Night Devour would have their life chi devoured bit by bit until they died. What was more terrifying was that Dark Night Devour was an extremely dark power. Very few powers could restrain this kind of dark power. Chapter 2205. As Yi Qinxiang's voice fell, Nietian immediately felt a terrifying berserk aura scuttling through his body. It was like a bloodthirsty beast that was actually madly devouring his life force. Damn it! Nietian looked down at the wound on his shoulder. It was actually expanding. The flesh around the wound quickly turned black and soon lost all signs of life. Oh no! At the same time, Fat Cat's voice was filled with unconcealable panic as she shouted, "Nietian, leave this place first." Nietian nodded heavily. Although he had used up a lot of blood chi, he could still persist for a while by relying on the earth vein source in his body. Next, the most important thing was to break Yi Qinxiang's barrier and leave this place. Nietian didn't expect Yi Qinxiang's bloodline power to be so tyrannical that it could directly devour life force. His figure moved, wanting to leave, but he was blocked by an invisible force. The space seemed to be solidifying bit by bit. Nietian's brow furrowed as his expression flickered. Such powerful ward power. Even if he had a tough mind, he couldn't help but show panic at this moment. If he couldn't even break Yi Qinxiang's barrier, then it was impossible for him to leave. The next moment, Nietian's expression darkened. He raised his arm with difficulty and stabbed out with starlight heavenly slash. Bang! The sword's shadow whizzed out and bombarded the barrier. A muffled sound rang out, but it had no effect. Nietian used almost all of his strength in this sword strike, even using demonic god power. Unfortunately, he was too weak at the moment. Demonic god power originally had a strong restraining effect on all kinds of barriers, but Nietian had used up too much demonic god power just now. Now, he couldn't even break the barrier in front of him. Trying to escape? Yi Qinxiang looked at Nietian cold from the side with a playful expression. She laughed very arrogantly. Nietian, with your current strength, you can't break this prince's dark night barrier. This prince is prepared to watch you die slowly, slowly. This prince is very curious. Will a person like you be afraid at the moment of death? Ha! At the end of her speech, Yi Qinxiang actually laughed complacently. Obviously, he didn't want to kill Nie Tian right away. Instead, he wanted to torture Nie Tian to death slowly. Almost all of the 13 Azure kings he had brought with him had died at the hands of Nie Tian. If he killed Nie Tian, it would be too easy for him. This damned pervert. Fat Cat let out a strange cry and asked anxiously, Nie Tian, how are you feeling now? I won't die for now, Nie Tian responded in a deep voice. Although he was very stubborn, the life aura in his body was being devoured crazily. At this moment, his entire body was bleeding profusely. The wounds from before had become even more glaring. It was as if his entire body had been cut by countless blades, and his entire body was about to fall apart at any moment. Right now, Nie Tian was almost in a situation of certain death. The loss of life aura made him weaker and weaker. Even his body began to sway. Outside the barrier, the crowd couldn't see what was happening and could only worry helplessly. But from Yi Qinxiang's arrogant reaction, it seemed that Nie Tian was about to die. Ouyang Chuan watched from afar. His expression was conflicted, hesitating whether he should intervene or not. He had clearly heard the conversation between Nie Tian and Yi Qinxiang just now. Although he didn't know Yi Qinxiang's true identity, he could guess that the latter must be from super force. Otherwise, Yin Xianwei wouldn't be so respectful in front of him. More importantly, Nie Tian had told him that he wasn't allowed to get involved. Sect leader Ouyang believed this prince. If you dare to intervene, you will definitely regret it. Yi Qinxiang looked at Ouyang Chuan cold. She was very arrogant and said insolently, the price of intervening in this matter is something you definitely can't afford. Ouyang Chuan's eyes trembled, and his figure involuntarily took a few steps back. Yi Qinxiang's blatant threat made him believe that there was a super force hiding behind the former. Little friend Nie Tian, my ability is really limited. Whether you can survive or not depends on yourself. Ouyang Chuan sighed in his heart. In the end, he still decided not to intervene. At the same time, inside the Dark Night barrier, Nie Tian's aura was becoming weaker and weaker. His whole body was swaying like a small boat in a stormy sea in imminent danger. Nie Tian, let the Golden Leo and Pai Xiao come out. The two mythological beasts will join forces and break through the barrier. At the moment of crisis, Fat Cat's eyes suddenly flickered, and she shouted in surprise. Yes. Nie Tian's expression changed slightly, and he nodded heavily. He almost forgot that among the 9 superbs, there were 2 mythological beasts, the Golden Leo and Pai Xiao. You too come out. Whether you can break through the Dark Night barrier depends on you. Nie Tian murmured, and the 9 superbs appeared in his hand. In a ball of space-time light, the figures of 2 giant beasts appeared. Roar! Roar! The moment the Golden Leo and the Pai Xiao appeared, they roared at the sky at the same time. Their roars were like thunder, shaking the heaven and earth. Huh? Yi Qinxiang suddenly felt that something was wrong. Her eyes suddenly trembled, and then she saw the Golden Leo and the Pai Xiao, and she shouted strangely, "There are 2 beasts beside you." The next moment, her figure moved, and she directly attacked. Although she really wanted to see Nie Tian die with her own eyes, to be safe, it was better to kill Nie Tian first. She felt a strong threat from Nie Tian. If Nie Tian did not die, she would feel like there was a thorn in her back, and she would not be able to eat or sleep in peace. Xiao Guai, stop her! Nie Tian vaguely saw Yi Qinxiang's figure approaching, and she directly shouted in a low voice. Roar! Xiao Guai, of course, understood Nie Tian's words. With a low roar, its giant body rushed over madly, and the surrounding space was violently pulled. Then Nie Tian looked at the Golden Leo and said in a deep voice, Golden Leo, break the bounded shield. The Golden Leo's giant head shook a little, and then the violent power of the golden flame surged around it. Its giant body seemed to be burning, and it turned into a horrible ball of fire. The Golden Leo's 4 hooves galloped, and its momentum shook the heaven and earth, directly colliding with the bounded shield. Boom! With a deafening sound, the whole bounded shield of darkness suddenly shook, and then a dazzling crack appeared. The golden Leo's body was huge, and it suddenly exerted a great force, which was simply too great. Even the bounded shield of darkness could not bear the impact of such a force. Damn it! Yi Qinxiang suddenly felt that the bounded shield of darkness was about to collapse. She roared and slapped her palm down. A black light rushed over like a giant snake and actually left a horrible wound on the body of the Pai Xiao, which was dozens of meters long. Roar! The sudden pain made Xiao Guai howl to the sky. However, it was not timid. Its giant body rolled over, and unexpectedly, it pounced on Yi Qinxiang. What a powerful beast! Yi Qinxiang obviously did not expect Xiao Guai to be so terrifying. After a scream, she was forced to retreat. Chapter 2206. The Ward of Darkness is broken. When Ye Tian saw a huge gap in the barrier, his eyes couldn't help but tremble, and he couldn't conceal the joy on his face. Then, he turned around and shouted, "Bab, let's go." However, Bab's giant body was shaking in the air, as if it was about to fall. What's going on? Then he saw a black wound on little Guai's back, which looked like a blood-colored river that was emitting a pungent, bloody aura. Oh no! Seeing this scene, Nye Tian exclaimed in shock. He immediately realized that Bab had been injured by Yi Qinxiang's devouring power. At this moment, Yi Qinxiang's gaze was also trembling. He clearly hadn't expected his dark night enchantment to be broken. Nye Tian, let's get out of here. The little fat cat's voice rang out again, reminding Nye Tian. Nye Tian looked at Yi Qinxiang with bloodshot eyes. He wanted to tear Yi Qinxiang into pieces. However, he was too weak and needed to recover. Bab's life was also in danger. Let's get out of here first. Nye Tian decided to leave this place at once. He activated the 9 superbs by force. A beam of space-time light appeared and enveloped Bab, taking it into the 9 superbs. Golden Centipede, which was full of intelligence, returned to the 9 superbs. Immediately afterwards, Nye Tian summoned the last bit of his strength to activate his Star Soul wings, and with a loud flap, he flew out of the ward. Yi Qinxiang was far away from Nye Tian. He wanted to help him, but it was too late. He could only watch helplessly as Nye Tian entered the 5th level of the cave, unable to do anything about it. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! Yi Qinxiang was like an enraged beast, her entire body trembling. He didn't expect that Nye Tian could escape under such circumstances. However, in the next moment, the corners of his lips curled into a cold smile as he said in a deep voice, "Nye Tian, I don't believe that you can still survive after my Dark Night devouring power pierced through your body." The Dark Night Devourer was extremely tyrannical, directly devouring life energy. Yi Qinxiang firmly believed that even if Nye Tian escaped, he would definitely die. The devouring power of the Dark Night around him dissipated, and he stared at a cave with a burning gaze. His eyes were filled with unwillingness. Without seeing Nye Tian's corpse with his own eyes, he still felt a little uneasy. He had a vague feeling that Nye Tian would be an exception. At this moment, he even wanted to rush into the cave, but after some thought, he resisted the urge. He knew his own limitations and knew that with his talent, he would not be able to enter the 5th level of the cave. 7th Prince, is Nye Tian dead? At this time, Yin Xinyue's figure arrived. She didn't know what had happened and asked nervously. The corners of Yi Qinxiang's mouth twitched, and she said, "He escaped into the cave." The 5th level of the cave? Yin Xinyue's beautiful eyes trembled violently, and her face was filled with disbelief. She had already seen that Nye Tian was covered in blood and severely injured. Under such circumstances, Yi Qinxiang personally intervened, but Nye Tian still managed to escape. How terrifying was Nye Tian? Don't worry. My Dark Night, devouring power pierced through that kid's body. Even if he enters the cave, he will definitely die. Yi Qinxiang glanced at Yin Xinyue and comforted her. Yin Xinyue's beautiful eyes flickered, obviously doubting Yi Chunxiang's words. Without seeing Nie Tian's corpse with her own eyes, Yin Xianyue was still worried. In her eyes, Nie Tian was a person who was particularly good at creating miracles. Don't worry. If you're worried that the kid is still alive, we can wait. Yi Chenxiang knew what Yin Xianyue was thinking, nodded slightly, and said, My fifth brother will soon come to the Thousand Demons Cave. With his talent, entering the 5th level of the cave shouldn't be a problem. When the time comes, I'll let him enter the cave to check whether the kid is still alive. Okay. Yin Xianyue's pretty face was gloomy, and she could only nod helplessly. She had no other choice now. Her and Yi Chenxiang's talent was not strong enough, so they couldn't enter the 5th level of the cave. At the same time, in the 5th level of the cave number 17, Nie Tian walked along the cave step by step with difficulty, leaving a bloody trail along the way. He came to a slightly more spacious place, and quickly took out 9 Extreme. With a thought, he directly entered it. Xiaoguai. The moment he entered 9 Extreme, Nie Tian screamed. He was afraid that something had happened to Xiaoguai. Roar. But just as his voice died away, a familiar roar sounded. It was Xiaoguai responding to him. Xiaoguai. Nie Tian frowned. His eyes trembled, and his whole body stiffened. He saw that the long wound on Xiaoguai's back had stopped bleeding and was slowly recovering. What was even more strange was that the wound was no longer black, but had regained the color of flesh, apparently recovering to normal. After being stunned for a few seconds, Nie Tian finally reacted and said in horror, How is this possible? The wound on Xiaoguai's back was caused by Yi Chenxiang's Dark Night devouring power. It was definitely a fatal injury. Moreover, Nie Tian sensed that Xiaoguai's breath of life was rapidly weakening. How could it recover now? The Dark Night devouring power directly devoured the breath of life. Nie Tian couldn't imagine the weird scene in front of him. Brother Nie Tian, don't worry, Xiaoguai's fine now. At this time, a familiar child's voice sounded in Nie Tian's ears. It was Lin Shun. Lin Shun, it's you. Nie Tian stared at Lin Shun, and his pupils contracted. He immediately realized what had happened. Previously, when Xiaoguai was seriously injured, it was Lin Shun who helped it recover quickly with his blood. Now, it must be Lin Chen's credit that Xiaoguai could recover again. Nie Tian saw that Lin Chen's face was as pale as a piece of paper, which was obviously a symptom of blood loss. Undoubtedly, Lin Shun had saved Xiaoguai with his blood again. Brother Nie Tian, you are injured too. Lin Shun looked at Nie Tian in shock. Then he bit his finger, and blood slowly flowed out. My blood has a magical effect, Brother Nie Tian. Please have a try. Your blood is too terrifying. Nie Tian finally reacted, then raised his hand, held the blood on Lin Shen's finger, and dripped it onto the wound on his shoulder. At this moment, a strange scene occurred. Nie Tian saw that the black wound on his shoulder began to change color, and soon it regained the color of flesh. This scene took Nie Tian by surprise. He opened his mouth, but couldn't make a sound. He knew that Lin Shen's blood was terrifying, but he never expected it to be so terrifying that it could suppress the Dark Night devouring power. Chapter 2207. Nie Tian stared at the wound on his shoulder that was slowly healing. It took him a long while before he realized what had happened. Lin Shen's blood was indeed terrifying. The Dark Night Devour was the power of the Yi family's bloodline. It was a power that could directly devour life, energy. Nie Tian had not expected that it would be suppressed by Lin Shen's blood. After a while, the dark energy on Nie Tian's shoulder faded and the wound began to heal. At this time, Lin Shun still wanted to bite his finger, but was stopped by Nie Tian. Lin Shun, I'm fine now. Nie Tian smiled. The wounds on his body were healing on their own. Lin Shen's face was pale. He had lost a lot of blood. Nie Tian would not take any more of his blood. Most importantly, Nie Tian had the source of the earth in his body. After the Dark Night Devourer disappeared, he only needed to rest for a while, and he would be able to recover. This time, it's all thanks to this little guy. Fat Cat's voice was heard. Her blue eyes could not hide her excitement. It seems that this little guy is more talented than I expected. Lin Chen's blood could suppress the Dark Night Devour. This was something that even Fat Cat had not expected. Nye Tian nodded and sat down cross-legged. The source of the earth in his body slowly released life energy, and the wounds on his body began to heal. It had to be said that the crisis was resolved in an instant because of Lin Chen. Nye Tian had the source of the earth in his body, coupled with the fiend god nascent embryo. Even without Lin Chen's blood, he could still suppress the Dark Night Devourer with the power of the fiend god. However, it would take a long time, and he would have to suffer a great deal of pain. Most importantly, Bab was also affected by the Dark Night Devourer. Even though the Pai Xiu was born with a strong body, it could not resist the Dark Night Devourer. Without Lin Chen, the Pai Xiu would not have been able to survive. Half a day later, Nye Tian stood up again. The wounds on his body had completely healed, but his strength had not fully recovered. Phew! Nye Tian exhaled a mouthful of turbid air, and a sharp glint appeared in his eyes. Big brother Nye Tian, the wounds on your body are gone. Lin Chen looked at Nye Tian, her little face full of surprise. She was obviously shocked by Nye Tian's strong recovery ability. Nye Tian smiled, nodded, and said solemnly, Lin Chen, thank you. Lin Chen's face turned slightly red, and her gaze became passionate as she said, Brother Nye Tian, you will definitely help me find my brother, right? Nye Tian nodded heavily, his eyes filled with determination. He had already decided to help Lin Chen find his brother. Now that he had received such a huge favor from the other party, there was even more reason for him to refuse. Thank you, big brother Nye Tian. Lin Chen was so happy that he almost jumped up. However, a hint of worry could be seen on Nye Tian's face at this moment. He was not worried about how to help Lin Chen find his brother, but worried about Lin Chen's body. Lin Chen was a martial artist with 9 elements as one, and the 9 elemental meridians in his body were sealed by the 9 primordial divine seal. This was a very serious situation. Fat Cat said that if Lin Chen was still unable to open the 9 primordial divine seal after a period of time, he would never be able to awaken his elemental spirit and would be stuck at the elemental meridian realm for the rest of his life. Lin Chen's talent was too strong. A dragon vein martial artist with 9 elements as one. If he could only be an elemental meridian martial artist, it would be too much of a pity. Is the 9 primordial divine seal really that hard to open? Nye Tian frowned and sighed in his heart. Nye Tian, I know what you are thinking. Fat Cat guessed Nye Tian's thoughts and sighed as well, and said, Lin Chen's talent is indeed strong. Even compared to you, he is not much inferior. Such a talented little guy, if he is stuck at the elemental meridian realm for the rest of his life, it would really be a pity. Actually, I've been thinking about the 9 primordial divine seal. Perhaps there is something that can help Lin Chen open the seal. At this point, Fat Cat's eyes flickered, and she did not continue speaking. What is it? Nye Tian heard Fat Cat's words, and his eyes could not help but heat up, and he asked in surprise, Nye Tian, do you know why it is so difficult to open the 9 primordial divine seal? Fat Cat laughed bitterly and did not say it directly, but asked a question instead. Nye Tian shook his head, and his face was full of doubt. He did not know much about seals, but he knew that any seal, even an extremely strong one, was usually very easy to open. However, the opening of the 9 primordial divine seal seemed to be very troublesome, and even Fat Cat found it difficult to open. 9 Yuan divine seal. The greatest difference between this seal and the other seals is that this seal contains 9 different elemental powers. Fat Cat's expression became much more serious, and she said, the 9 elemental powers fuse into one in the 9 primordial divine seal. If you want to open the 9 primordial divine seal, you need something that contains 9 elemental attributes at the same time. This kind of thing is very difficult to find. Sigh. As Fat Cat said this, she could not help but let out a long sigh. Nye Tian's eyes trembled, and he immediately understood what Fat Cat meant. The 9 primordial divine seal contained 9 elemental attributes, and to open this seal, She needed something that contained 9 elemental attributes at the same time. However, most things in the world only had one attribute, and it was very difficult to find something that contained 2 elemental attributes at the same time, let alone something that contained 9 elemental attributes. Tian could be considered a person who had seen some of the world, but in his memory, there was no item with 9 elemental attributes at all. Fat, you know something about 9 elemental attributes, right? At this moment, Tian's eyes trembled slightly, and he asked a little nervously. Since Fat Cat said so, there should be a target. Yes. Fat Cat nodded and said, in my memory, there is indeed something with 9 elemental attributes, called the 9 Hearts Demonic Lotus. 9 Hearts Demonic Lotus. Hearing this name, Tian frowned slightly, and his eyes couldn't help but tremble. Just this name alone seemed to be very exciting. 9 Hearts Demonic Lotus. 1 lotus with 9 hearts. 9 hearts as one. Fat Cat nodded slightly and said, this is a kind of strange flower. When it grows, it can simultaneously absorb the 9 elemental powers of heaven and earth, nurturing 9 lotus hearts, and then the 9 hearts will fuse into one, condensing into the heart of the demonic lotus. As long as we can find a mature 9 Hearts Demonic Lotus and take its heart, we can help Lin Shun open the 9 Primordial Divine Seal. At this point, Fat Cat's eyes suddenly trembled and actually became blazing hot, and said, more importantly, the 9 lotus leaves of the 9 Hearts Demonic Lotus gather together in the shape of a flower cluster, called the Demonic Lotus 9 Flames. The heart of the Demonic Lotus is where the essence of the 9 Hearts Demonic Lotus lies, and the Demonic Lotus 9 Flames is where its power gathers. If we really find the 9 Hearts Demonic Lotus, the heart of the Demonic Lotus can help Lin Chen open the seal, and the Demonic Lotus 9 Flames can help you advance to the Supreme Realm. Advance to the Supreme Realm. Chapter 2208. Hearing Fat Cat say that the 9 Demonic Lotus Flames of the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus could help him ascend to the Paramount Realm, Tian's expression changed slightly. He was very tempted. He was currently at the peak of the Overgod Realm. One more step, and he would be able to step into the Paramount Realm. For Tian, this small increase in realm was definitely a qualitative leap. The difference between the early Paramount God and the peak of the Overgod Realm seemed to be only a small difference, but the gap between them was like the difference between heaven and earth, especially for Tian. As long as he could ascend to the Paramount Realm, the primal star stone in his body would awaken the power of 900 billion stars. The power of 900 billion stars was all the power of the stars in the Milky Way. If it were all awakened, Tian didn't know what would happen. Therefore, once he ascended to the Paramount Realm, his martial body was bound to welcome a powerful upgrade. More importantly, after entering the land of the abandoned, Tian had seen a lot of powerful experts, each more monstrous than the last, and each more powerful than the last. This caused him to have a deeper understanding of how weak he was. As long as he could ascend to the Paramount Realm, at least he wouldn't have to fear people like Yi Chenxiang and Yin Xie. Looks like you're tempted, Tian. Fat Cat couldn't help but laugh when she saw Tian's eyes twinkling. Tian nodded heavily. The 9 Hearts Demon Lotus was a rare treasure of heaven and earth. How could he not be tempted? The temptation of ascending to the Paramount Realm was too great for him. Little fatty, do you know where to find the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus? Tian's eyes suddenly flickered, and he asked nervously. There must be a reason why Fat Cat suddenly mentioned the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus. Yes. Fat Cat nodded slightly and named a person. That night elf. Tian's eyes flickered violently as he exclaimed, the 7th Prince. You mean he has the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus? The Fat Cat's expression changed slightly, but she shook her head and said, he doesn't have the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus on him, but I can sense its aura on him. What do you mean? Tian frowned, not quite understanding what Fat Cat meant. If Yi Chenxiang didn't have the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus on her, then why would she have the aura of the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus? This sovereign guessed that he must have absorbed the power of the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus. The Fat Cat laughed and said, Furthermore, I can sense that the 9 hearts demon lotus he used should be a young flower that is yet to mature. If he had absorbed a matured 9 hearts demonic lotus, his current strength would be far greater than this. Hearing the fat cat's words, Nietion's expression couldn't help but change. He suddenly reacted, and the corners of his mouth raised into a smile. He said in a deep voice, "So, Yi Qinxiang should know where to find the 9 heart demon lotus." Since Yi Qinxiang had absorbed the power of the 9 hearts demon lotus, she naturally knew about it. Yes. The fat cat nodded and said, "Nietion, that night elf isn't easy to deal with. It won't be easy for you to find out about the 9 hearts demon lotus from him." "Not easy is good." Nietion smiled faintly and said, "I like to do challenging things." Yi Qinxiang had almost killed Nietion, so the latter naturally wouldn't let him go. Originally, Nietion had planned to settle the score with Yi Qinxiang after he recovered his strength. Now, if he killed Yi Qinxiang and obtained information about the 9 hearts demon lotus, wouldn't it be killing 2 birds with 1 stone? The fat cat looked at Nietion's expression and knew that the latter would definitely look for Yi Qinxiang. She couldn't help but laugh bitterly and said, "Nietion, it's still too early to think about the 9 hearts demon lotus. Since we've already come to this cave, let's go look for the space-time crystal Yuans first." "Yes." Nietion nodded, and the corners of his mouth raised into a faint smile. "Big brother Nietion, what are you thinking about?" Lin Chan saw that Nietion was standing in place with his expression constantly changing. He couldn't help but feel a little puzzled and raised his head to ask. "Nothing." Nietion patted Lin Chen's little head and smiled faintly. He said in his heart, "Little Lin Chen, you've helped me, so I naturally won't let you down. I must get the 9 hearts demon lotus." If he didn't know about the 9 hearts demon lotus, then it would have been fine. But since he knew about its existence, Nietion obviously had to get his hands on it. Next, Nietion let Lin Chan stay in the 9 extremities while he himself came out of the 9 extremities. Will there be space-time crystal Yuans in this cave? Nietion looked at the strange stone walls around him and muttered with a frown. The news about the space-time crystal Yuans came from Ouyang Chuan. Nietion believed that the other party definitely wouldn't lie to him. Then, he walked forward along the cave, step by step very carefully. He had already entered the cave once before and knew how dangerous it was. Of course, he was very cautious. Along the way, he avoided several killing arrays. Fortunately, there was Fat Cat, otherwise Nietion would have died in the killing arrays. The cave wasn't very long, but Nietion walked for a few hours and finally reached the end of the cave. At the end of the cave was a spacious cave with a circumference of a few thousand meters. The space was very spacious. The moment he entered the cave, Nietion felt a very mysterious force circulating in the space, as if it came from the space itself. It was invisible and formless, but it was everywhere. What a strange force! He exclaimed in surprise and couldn't help but be more cautious. Next, every step he took was very careful, because he knew that if he took a wrong step, he would be consigned to eternal damnation. Nietion activated the holographic sacred glyphs and sensed the surrounding space bit by bit. What surprised him was that there was actually nothing in such a spacious cave. Empty, nothing at all. What's going on? Nietion frowned, and his expression became even more puzzled. He walked along the cave, and there were no forks along the way. There was only one path. Now that he came to the end of the cave, he still didn't find anything. Didn't this mean that the cave was empty? But Ouyang Chuan had clearly told him that there were space-time crystal essences in the cave. Just as Nietion was puzzled, Fat Cat's voice sounded and calmed him down. "Nietion, don't be anxious. Carefully sense the force in the space." Nietion nodded, then took a deep breath and calmed down. He walked step by step, slowly approaching the center of the cave. He could clearly feel that the mysterious force in the space was getting stronger and stronger, even causing him a certain amount of pressure. This force was very strange, as if it was coming from all directions, giving people a feeling of helplessness. "Stop!" Just as Nietion was about to reach the center of the cave, Fat Cat's voice suddenly sounded. It was a scream, scaring Nietion so much that he froze on the spot. "Fat, what's wrong?" Nietion's eyes trembled slightly, and he asked in confusion. "Nietion, it's right in front of you, 5 meters away," Fat Cat said in a deep voice. His voice was very strange, and there was a trace of excitement in it. Nietion frowned, and his expression became even more puzzled. Because there was nothing in front of him, he couldn't see anything, and he couldn't sense anything. "Use the chaotic flame," Fat Cat said again, his fat face rippling with unconcealable excitement. Nietion nodded slightly, and a chaotic flame surged on his palm. He gently pushed it out, and suddenly the chaotic flame was like a tentacle probing in the air. The next moment, a strange scene happened. Chapter 2209. Nietion's expression changed when he saw the flame of chaos vanish into thin air. He was horrified. This was something that he had never expected. "Lil Fatty, what's going on?" After a few seconds, he came back to his senses and asked in shock. It really is the space-time crystal element." However, the Fat Cat did not answer his question. Instead, it laughed strangely and said, "Continue to use the flame of chaos. I want to see how big the appetite of this space-time crystal element is." Nietion was stunned. He was even more puzzled, but he still followed the Fat Cat's instructions and continued to release the flame of chaos. Next, a strange scene continued to play out. The flame of chaos probed in the air and then disappeared instantly. There seemed to be a monster hidden in the void that could devour the flame of chaos. This made Nietion feel very shocked. The flame of chaos was formed by the fusion of the first demon fire, the universe boundary, and the second demon fire, the heart of nothingness. It contained the power of creation and destruction. Although Nietion's control over the flame of chaos was very weak, the power of the flame of chaos itself was already very terrifying. What was hidden in the air that could devour the flame of chaos? Just as Nietion was feeling bewildered, an even more bizarre scene occurred. Bang! The void suddenly trembled, as if a huge heart was beating. In the blink of an eye, Nietion felt an invisible force spreading out and spreading through the air. Boom! The huge cave was hit by this force and shook violently as if it was about to collapse. Nietion was shocked and instinctively retreated. "Nietion, don't be nervous. The thing you want is about to appear." However, the Fat Cat was very calm and even proud at this moment. Nietion's expression stiffened. He stared at the void in front of him with a burning gaze, as if he was waiting for something. Boom! In the next moment, the surrounding space shook again, and then a white ball of light appeared. What a strong space-time aura! In an instant, Nietion felt a vast and boundless space-time aura, which gave him the illusion that there was a boundless ocean in front of him. He stared at the ball of white light without blinking. The space was filled with a vast space-time aura, but this aura was very gentle and didn't give Nietion any pressure. Is this the space-time crystal essence? Nietion stared at the white ball of light and sensed the space-time aura within it with an intoxicated expression. Although the sphere of light was only the size of a fist, Nietion could sense that the space-time energy contained within it was boundless and boundless. Boom! At this moment, the white ball of light suddenly shook and then suddenly expanded, instantly expanding dozens of times. Nietion reacted quickly and immediately retreated, almost touching the ball of light. A moment later, the white ball of light expanded to a radius of a few meters and finally stopped. Seeing this, Nietion couldn't help but raise the corner of his lips. He moved his feet and wanted to touch the ball of light. However, at this moment, the white ball of light suddenly spun, and a colorful halo immediately surged in the air, instantly filling the entire cave. In an instant, the originally bare cave was actually covered in colorful light. The gentle and bright light flowed in the air, giving people a feeling of extreme beauty. Nietion looked at the colorful space and felt that it was unreal, as if he was in a dream. However, the colorful halo didn't last long and was quickly absorbed by the white ball of light. Then, The white ball of light began to shrink continuously. In the blink of an eye, it had shrunk back to its original size, which was only the size of fist. Nietion watched from the side and didn't dare to be careless, nor did he dare to go forward and touch it. He felt a very terrifying space-time aura in the white ball of light. If the space-time power exploded into a space-time storm, it would be enough to kill him instantly. Nietion, pick up the space-time crystal. Let's go. At this moment, Fat Cat's voice was heard, and it said with a chuckle. Nietion was stunned and couldn't react for a long time. He suspected that he had heard wrongly. Fat Cat asked him to pick up the space-time crystal directly. Was it really okay? Don't worry. When you used the chaotic flame just now, it has already swallowed the violent power of the space-time crystal. Now, this space-time crystal is no longer a threat to you, Fat said with a chuckle, seeing that Nietion was stunned. Of course, he knew what the latter was worried about. Fat, what's going on? Nietion reacted, took a step forward, and held the space-time crystal in his hand. However, he felt that it was very strange because it was too easy to obtain the space-time crystal. The space-time crystal is used to stabilize space-time. It contains a very large amount of space-time power, but it is very gentle. Fat Cat laughed and explained, when you used the space-time chaotic flame just now, it was instantly absorbed by the space-time crystal. Although you didn't feel anything, just now, the violent power in the space-time crystal has already been swallowed by the chaotic flame. This, Nietion was stunned. Obviously, he didn't expect the chaotic flame to be so powerful. What he saw just now was the chaotic flame being swallowed, but what actually happened was that the chaotic flame was swallowing the violent power in the space-time crystal. The chaotic flame is formed by the fusion of two supreme flames. It contains the power of creation and destruction, so it is not strange for it to control a piece of space-time crystal. Fat Cat chuckled and said, let me tell you, you know nothing about the chaotic flame now. If your strength can reach the sage realm, you will know that the power of the chaotic flame is far more terrifying than you can imagine. Nietion swallowed his saliva. He had indeed underestimated the power of the chaotic flame. How could the supreme flame, formed by the fusion of the boundary of a universe and the heart of nothingness, be so simple? But in any case, the space-time crystal was already in his hands, which made Nietion very happy. One less thing was weighing on his mind. Then, Nietion put away the space-time crystal and left directly. After a while, he came to the entrance of the cave. He looked outside the cave and found that Yi Chunxiang and Yin Xie were still there. Nietion, it seems that these two guys are worried about you. They are worried that you're not dead and are waiting for you outside. Fat Cat laughed and said with a strange look in her eyes, Seventh Prince, Yin Xie, should I feel honored that you have such strong, killing intent towards me? The corners of Nietion's mouth curled up. His gaze locked onto Yi Chunxiang. What was revealed in his eyes was not fear, but an undisguised, blazing desire. Yi Chunxiang did not leave, which was exactly what Nietion wanted. Previously, Fat Cat had said that he sensed the aura of the Nine Hearts Demon Lotus on Yi Chunxiang. Originally, Nietion was still worried that Yi Chunxiang and Yin Xie had already left, and it would be very troublesome to find them. Chapter 22:10. Outside Thousand Demon Mountain, the figures of Yi Chunxiang and Yin Xie stood high in the sky, their eyes fixed on a cave. That kid has been in the cave for almost a day, and there has been no movement until now. He must be dead inside. Yi Chunxiang frowned slightly, seemingly a little impatient from waiting, and said in a deep voice. She and Yin Xie waited outside the cave for almost a day, and could not help but feel a little annoyed. They could not see the situation inside the cave, and could not enter the cave, so they could only wait outside. Yin Xie was very persistent, and said with a vicious look in his eyes, that kid is very strange. Until we see his body, we can only assume that he is still alive. When Yi Chunxiang heard Yin Xinyue's words, his eyes narrowed, obviously a little unhappy. He accompanied Yin Xie here this time to kill Nietion. But now, Nietion's life or death was unknown, and his 13 Azura kings were also lost. He was in a bad mood, and Insienue firmly believed that Nietion was still alive, which made him even more annoyed. Are we going to keep waiting? Yi Qinxiang's eyes turned slightly cold, obviously unable to wait any longer. Seventh Prince, you have to be patient. In Xinyue's beautiful eyes flickered, and she comforted. His Royal Highness the Fifth Prince will be here soon anyway. We might as well wait here for a while. Yi Qinxiang frowned even more, but seeing In Xinyue's very persistent look, she could only nod. Why? Are you too impatient while waiting for me? At this moment, a familiar voice suddenly came from the cave, resounding in the void, seemingly extremely playful. Nietion. Hearing this voice, Yi Qinxiang and In Xinyue were stunned at the same time, and their expressions changed. They heard very clearly that this voice was definitely Nietion's. He is not dead. Yi Qinxiang instantly reacted and screamed, her face as ugly as it could be. This guy is really still alive. In Xinyue's expression was even more exaggerated. Extreme hatred twisted her delicate facial features, and her pretty face revealed a hideous look. Although she had a feeling that Nietion might still be alive, she couldn't help it. But when this intuition was confirmed, it was still so shocking. At this time, Ouyang Chuan and the others had already left, but there were still many people around. When the crowd heard Nietion's voice again, the shock in their hearts was written all over their faces. They didn't expect Nietion to still be alive. Nietion had killed the 13 Azuras and fought Yi Qinxiang with his blood-soaked body. In this sort of situation, he had entered the cave injured, and yet he was still alive. This was too unbelievable. Impossible. This is absolutely impossible. Suddenly, Yi Qinxiang roared like a mad beast. He was hit by my Dark Knight Devourer. How can he still be alive? He should be dead. He should have been killed by the devouring power of the Dark Knight. Yi Qinxiang was on the verge of going crazy. She was extremely furious. Seventh Prince, do you think the power of your bloodline is very strong? At this time, provocative laughter came from a cave. It was Nietion's voice. In my opinion, your Dark Knight Devour power is trash. Not worth mentioning at all. Undisguised sarcasm. Every word was like a steel needle, piercing Yi Qinxiang's heart, causing him to fall into an even more frenzied state. Nietion, you are too arrogant. If you have the guts, then come out and fight this prince to the death. Yi Qinxiang roared violently. His eyes became bloodshot, and his body trembled nonstop. Seventh Prince, he is angering you. You have to calm down. In Xinyue saw Yi Qinxiang's rage, stepped forward, and said heavily, Calm down. Yi Qinxiang suddenly looked at In Xinyue, suddenly raised his hand, and slapped it down. Slap! Without warning, a crisp slap sounded, and In Xinyue suddenly felt a burning pain on half of his face. Seventh Prince, you. In Xinyue looked at Yi Qinxiang dumbfoundedly, apparently not expecting the latter to slap her in front of so many people. In Xinyue, you stupid woman. It is because of you that this prince came back here. It is because of you that this prince's 13 Azura kings died tragically. And it is because of you that this prince was humiliated by this brat. Yi Qinxiang's eyes turned cold, and she roared violently, as if she wanted to kill In Xinyue. In Xinyue's eyes suddenly trembled. She couldn't believe the moment in front of her, and her eyes became moist. How could she have imagined that the seventh prince, who is usually gentle and considerate to her, would slap her in front of so many people? This slap was even louder than the dozens of slaps that Nietion had given her. When Nietion slapped her, there were only a few people present. And now, there were hundreds of thousands of eyes watching. In Xinyue was the eldest princess of the Yingyue Empire. This slap was not only a slap to her face, but also a humiliation to the Yingyue Empire. In Xinyue, are you not convinced? At this time, Yi Qinxiang seemed to have endured for a long time, and looked at In Xinyue with, Do you believe that this prince can kill you right now? You want to kill me? In Xinyue's eyes trembled violently, and her eyes were filled with doubt, confusion, and even horror. She said in a trembling voice, Why? Just now, Yi Qinxiang was very calm, but in an instant, she became like this. This was unacceptable to Yin Xianwei. Yin Xianwei, do you think you are very important to this prince? Yi Chunxiang sneered and said directly, to tell you the truth, to this prince, you are just a plaything. This prince can spoil you, and I can also kill you at any time. Your Yinwei Empire is just a vassal force of our Dead Knight Empire. You can't be so naive to think that accompanying this prince for a few nights can make you a princess of the Dead Knight Empire, can you? This prince has long wanted to say these words, but in order to play with you for a while longer, I've been holding back. Look at you, so frightened. Don't you feel excited? Ha ha! At the end, Yi Qinxiang laughed wildly, and her state was very strange, as if she was crazy. Yi Qinxiang only had a momentary liking for Yin Xianwei, but his patience was limited. When the 13 Azura kings died tragically, he was already very angry. Now that he suddenly found that Niet Tian was still alive, he couldn't accept it for a while, and the anger in his heart suddenly erupted like a volcano. He couldn't threaten Niet Tian, so he could only find Yin Xianwei to vent his anger on. Seventh prince, are you speaking the truth? Yin Xianwei froze in place, and her beautiful eyes slowly welled up with tears, and her expression was almost desperate. Chapter 22:11. Yi Qinxiang looked at Yin Xianwei coldly, as if the other party was a toy that she had abandoned. Yin Xianwei's eyes trembled as he looked at Yi Qinxiang in disbelief. He couldn't believe that the person in front of him was the man who had been with her day and night. The crowd looked at the scene in the air with a completely dumbfounded expression, not knowing what was going on. Seventh prince, you're really a man. Humiliating your own woman in front of so many people, you're really bold. At this moment, an extremely mocking voice resounded through the sky, and it was filled with an extremely provocative tone. Yi Qinxiang suddenly turned around, and his eyes suddenly trembled. A figure stood behind him. It was Niet Tian. The words just now were said by Niet Tian. The provocation in the words was like a slap to Yi Qinxiang's face. Brat, how dare you come out? Yi Qinxiang growled. His whole person was furious like a wild beast, and his eyes were sharp and murderous. He never thought that Niet Tian would dare to come out of the cave. What shocked him even more was that Niet Tian's current state had completely recovered, and his aura was vigorous and vigorous. But just a day ago, Niet Tian was seriously injured, and his body was pierced by his devourer of the night. How could such a serious injury recover in such a short time? Are you surprised? Niet Tian knew what Yi Qinxiang was thinking, and said with a cold smile, but compared to you, I'm more surprised. Just a day ago, you said that Yin Xianwei was your woman, but now you can actually kick her away like a foot-binding cloth. This boldness is really in line with your identity as the seventh prince. Seventh prince, you're really a man with guts. I, Niet Tian, admire you. The words of admiration were filled with mockery, but more than that, it was an undisguised humiliation. Yi Qinxiang's actions made Niet Tian despise her. Even if he hated Yin Xianwei very much, he still felt uncomfortable seeing the scene in front of him. But it must be said that Yin Xianwei's current situation was completely caused by her. She was the one who gave up on Gale Xiao Xiao and chose this man who treated her as a plaything. Therefore, she had to accept the consequences herself. Niet Tian, I didn't think you would dare to come out. Since that's the case, I'll kill you with my own hands. Yi Qinxiang ignored Niet Tian's mockery. She had a gloomy expression on her face. She took a step forward, and the dark night devouring power gushed out from her body. The surrounding space instantly darkened and was filled with an extremely dense Yin aura. Another spirit formation? Seeing this scene, Niet Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, but the corners of his mouth rose into a disdainful smile. Using the same move on him twice, Yi Qinxiang really underestimated Niet Tian. Die! At that moment, Yi Qinxiang's fierce roar echoed out. Immediately afterwards, a streak of black light shot out towards Niet Tian like a black arrow, whistling through the air. Niet Tian felt a terrifying devouring power coming towards him, but he smiled faintly. He instantly activated the 3 forbidden techniques. Star Soul wings appeared on his back, and with a light tap of his feet, he perfectly avoided the black light. Yi Chenxiang was surprised. Obviously, she did not expect Nie Tian's speed to be so fast. How is this possible? You're not suppressed in the Dark Knight formation? In the next moment, Yi Chenxiang reacted and suddenly exclaimed. She was even more surprised in her heart. The most terrifying thing about the Dark Knight formation was that it was condensed with the Dark Knight devouring power, constantly suppressing the opponent's strength and devouring the opponent's life aura. But strangely, it seemed that Nie Tian was not affected at all in the Dark Knight formation. To Yi Chenxiang, this was simply impossible. Seventh Prince, I've already said that your bloodline power is too weak. To me, it's like nothing. Nie Tianling laughed. The sword aura around him surged violently, as if a sword god had descended. Arrogant. You're too arrogant. Yi Chenxiang was instantly enraged. Suddenly, her body shook, and a pair of Dark Knight wings condensed from the Dark Knight devouring power appeared on her back. The Dark Knight wings instantly spread out. It was actually 1,000 meters long, like 2 pieces of black cloth that covered the sky. Instantly, the surrounding space sank into deeper darkness. The gazes of the crowd trembled, and their expressions were filled with shock. At this moment, they could no longer see the shadows of Nie Tian and Yi Chenxiang. They could only see the sky full of black aura, as if night had descended, enveloping the entire area. Dark Knight wings, ultimate wing kill. Just at this moment, a cold voice resounded in the darkness. Boom! In the void, the Dark Knight wings instantly closed. On the tip of the wings, a sharp black light whizzed out. Like a giant black snake, it attacked towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian could feel the boundless black aura gathering and pressing down on him. He could not help but narrow his eyes. In the next moment, he no longer hesitated. The blood qi in his body instantly ignited. Under the stimulation of the blood qi, the sword aura around him became even more violent and violent. The sword aura surged. The sword aura was dense. The blood qi flew, and the sword aura was dazzling. Proud sword technique. Heaven destroying 3 swords. The final 3rd move. Heaven destroying 1 sword. Blood devours the heavens. In the boundless sword aura, Nie Tian's voice resounded, like the death god's knell, resounding in the darkness. Starry heaven / suddenly fell. Boundless sword aura condensed in an instant. In the void, a 3,000-meter-long sword shadow appeared. The sword aura surged for thousands of meters, like a startling rainbow across the night sky. Boom! The sword shadow was like a dragon, surging and rolling. The blood-red light was boiling nonstop. Outside of it, there was also a black power surging. It was the divine demon power. Nie Tian used all his strength in this sword. It could be said to be his strongest sword. When the 3 forbidden skills were activated, burning the blood qi, using the strongest forbidden sword, and the divine demon sword aura. The power of this sword was unimaginable. Bang! In the instant that the sword's shadow rolled, the Dark Knight boundary in the air could not bear the pressure of the sword aura and directly collapsed. In midair, the sharp black light also weakened a little. What's going on? Yi Chenxiang instantly felt a terrifying pressure appear. He could not help but tremble, and his expression became terrified. He simply couldn't believe that Nie Tian was able to unleash such a terrifying sword strike before his eyes. His Dark Knight boundary could not even bear the pressure of this sword aura. Boom! At this moment, high up in the sky, the divine demon sword aura and the black light collided. The void suddenly shook. Then, the black light directly collapsed. The divine demon sword aura was like a roaring dragon, directly pouncing towards Yi Chenxiang. No! Yi Chenxiang screamed. He wanted to escape, but it was already too late. In just an instant, the divine demon sword aura fell from the sky. Yi Chenxiang's figure was directly submerged in the mighty sword shadow. Everyone's eyes trembled. The moment the barrier was broken, they clearly saw this scene. Chapter 22:12. Everyone's eyes were focused on the silver-haired figure high up in the sky. The shock in their hearts was perfectly written on their faces. They simply could not imagine that Nie Tian could burst out such a terrifying sword attack in an instant. Yin Xinyue's whole face was stiff as she watched from the side. The shock in her heart was indescribable. Not long ago, she had fought with Nie Tian. At that time, the latter's strength was far less terrifying than it was now. But at this moment, Nie Tian's strength almost crushed Yi Qinxiang. One sword attack, just one sword attack, and Nie Tian completely defeated Yi Qinxiang. After a long time, the sword intent in the sky dissipated and a blood-red figure appeared, standing there shakily, as if he would fall at any time. This figure was none other than Yi Qinxiang. At this moment, his whole body was dripping with blood, as if he had just walked out of a blood pool. He looked at Nie Tian in horror, no longer arrogant, only horror and fear. He never dreamed that he would be defeated by Nie Tian with one sword attack. Not dead yet, a warrior with the power of bloodline has a strong martial body. Nie Tian looked at Yi Qinxiang, the corners of his mouth slightly raised, and his eyes revealed a playful smile. In the sword attack, just now, he used almost all the God Fiend power in his body. The God Fiend's sword essence combined with 5 sword intents erupted with unimaginable power. The God Fiend power was originally the power of darkness, and it stood at the pinnacle of darkness. It had a fatal suppression on all dark attribute powers. It was precisely because of this that Nie Tian's sword attack could directly injure Yi Qinxiang. It had to be said that Yi Qinxiang's martial body was really strong enough. She was hit head-on by the sword shadow, but still did not die. Yi Qinxiang did not die, which was not a bad thing for Nie Tian, but a good thing, because Nie Tian still had some questions to ask Yi Qinxiang at the moment. The corners of his mouth pulled up into a cold smile. His figure moved and directly came to a position less than 10 meters away from Yi Qinxiang, staring at the latter with a strange look. Yi Qinxiang looked at Nie Tian with incomparable shock. Being stared at by the latter made her whole body shiver. She said with a trembling voice, What do you want? What for?" Nie Tianling laughed and asked, "Seventh Prince, you wanted to kill me just now, and now you've been seriously injured by my sword. What do you think I should do as the victor?" Yi Qinxiang felt the killing intent in Nie Tian's eyes and couldn't help but gulp. Her teeth were chattering nonstop as she said, You want to kill me?" At this moment, Yi Qinxiang felt like she was a little lamb waiting to be slaughtered at any time. As for Nie Tian, he was like a butcher. With a steel knife in his hand, he could easily kill him at any time. "Seventh Prince, I still remember something you said to me." Nie Tian faintly smiled. "When my body is pierced by the devouring darkness, tell me to enjoy the despair of having my life devoured. I really want to ask you now, do you feel despair in the face of death? Do you enjoy this feeling?" His voice wasn't loud, but it was like a clap of thunder that struck Yi Qinxiang's ears. The latter subconsciously retreated, and the horror in his eyes showed that he didn't enjoy this feeling. Nie Tian, Lord Nie Tian, Lord Nie Tian." Yi Qinxiang panicked and was almost incoherent. He said, "I was wrong. I beg you, don't kill me. As long as you don't kill me, I'll do anything." The current Yi Qinxiang was no longer as arrogant as before. He wanted to kneel in front of Nie Tian and kowtow to admit his mistake. He was very regretful. Back then, he had the chance to kill Nie Tian directly, but he thought of slowly torturing Nie Tian to death. However, at this moment, the situation of the two had been reversed. Now, Nie Tian was the one who controlled life and death. "You'll do anything, really?" Nie Tian's eyes flashed with a strange light. He faintly smiled, and his face was playful. Yes. Yi Qinxiang nodded his head like a rattle drum. He suddenly looked at Yin Xinyue and said loudly, "It's her. It's this stupid woman. She missed you. Lord Nie Tian, as long as you don't kill me, I'll help you kill her and destroy the Yinhua Empire. How about it?" His eyes flickered with a fiery light, as if he saw the hope of survival. Yin Xinyue stood not far away, looking at Yi Qinxiang with a dull face. He didn't expect the latter to be so cowardly. Nie Tian looked at Yi Qinxiang and couldn't help but shake his head. He had seen people who were afraid of death, but it was really rare to see someone as afraid of death as Yi Qinxiang. In Xianyue. Suddenly, Nie Tian's gaze swept towards In Xianyue, and he said coldly, "Is this the person you chose? You gave up Gale Xiao Xiao for this scum. It seems that what I said before was not wrong at all. You, In Xianyue, are a blind man." The cold voice was filled with disdain and anger. In Xianyue's expression became even more painful when he heard Nie Tian's words. Nie Tian was right. He was indeed blind, and actually chose Yi Qinxiang. Yes, Gale Xiao Xiao's identity was indeed not worth mentioning compared to Yi Qinxiang, but Gale Xiao Xiao was definitely not a coward. If In Xianyue hadn't betrayed Gale Xiao Xiao, the latter would have died for her. But what about Yi Qinxiang? In order to save her life, she actually wanted to kill In Xianyue and destroy the Yue Empire. Such a person, if not scum, what was? In Xianyue's delicate facial features were twisted together, obviously very remorseful and pained. If she had a chance to choose again, she would definitely choose Gale Xiao Xiao and never Yi Qinxiang. But the reality was that there were no ifs. I really hope that Gale Xiao Xiao can see this scene. Nie Tian glanced at In Xianyue, sighed, and then fixed his eyes on Yi Qinxiang again. "Nya, Lord Nie Tian, are you not going to kill me?" Yi Qinxiang saw that the killing intent in Nie Tian's eyes had faded a lot, and could not help but ask with joy. "Humph." Nie Tianling laughed twice, and said directly, "Seventh Prince, you said you were a dragon of the ninth heaven, and Gale Xiao Xiao was a small loach in a stinking ditch. What about now? Do you still have such a sense of superiority?" Yi Qinxiang's expression froze slightly, and then she actually laughed, suddenly raised her hand, and slapped her face, saying, "Lord Nie Tian, I was wrong. Please don't take it to heart, Lord Nie Tian, and spare my life." Seeing Yi Qinxiang's action, Nie Tian could not help but smile bitterly and shake his head. This Yi Qinxiang, apart from being arrogant, had no other good points and was simply too stupid. He wanted to kill Nie Tian so much, and now that he failed, he thought that Nie Tian would let him go by saying a few words of apology and slapping himself a few times. How naive. The reason why Nie Tian did not kill him was because he still had something important to ask him. "Scum, listen carefully, I have a question for you." Nie Tian's face suddenly darkened, and he said coldly, "Where did the 9 hearts demonic lotus in your body come from?" Chapter 22:13. When Yi Qinxiang suddenly heard Nie Tian mention the 9 hearts demon lotus, he froze on the spot and could not say a word for a long time. He did not expect that Nie Tian actually knew about the 9 hearts demon lotus. "You, how do you know about the 9 hearts demon lotus?" Yi Qinxiang was stunned for a few seconds and finally reacted. "Scum, am I asking you a question now? Or are you asking me a question?" Nie Tian's face darkened, and his eyes revealed a cold, murderous intent, shrouding Yi Qinxiang. Yi Qinxiang was shrouded by the murderous intent, and his whole body trembled violently, almost falling down. At this moment, he did not answer Nie Tian's question, but looked at Nie Tian with a strange expression, as if he was looking for something. "Scum, you don't have much time left." Nie Tian spoke again, and his voice was extremely cold. "Now, answer my question." Yi Qinxiang was frightened by Nie Tian, and he trembled violently. He took a few steps back, shook his head, and said, I can't say it. If I say it, I will definitely die a horrible death." Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, and then sneered, "Seventh Prince, do you think you still have a choice? If you don't say it, you will die a horrible death now." As soon as he finished speaking, Nie Tian took a step forward, and suddenly a violent sword aura appeared, pressing directly towards Yi Qinxiang. "Ah!" Yi Qinxiang screamed, and could not bear the pressure of the sword aura at all. His body trembled, and his whole body directly collapsed. This kid, such a ruthless method. The crowd saw this scene, and their eyes trembled violently, and they cried out in their hearts. Nie Tian's strength and talent were far beyond everyone's imagination. They did not expect that his method would be so vicious and extremely cruel. Insia saw Yi Chunxiang collapse like a pile of mud, but there was no panic in her eyes. Instead, she was very excited. She and Yi Chunxiang had already fallen out, so of course she would not worry about the latter situation. She even hoped that Nie Tian would directly kill Yi Chunxiang. Even though Yi Chunxiang was scum, his status was extremely high. He was the 7th prince of the Dead Knight Empire. The Inuit Empire, the Dark Knight, Azura Field, and even the Dark Moon Divine Sect were all vassal forces of the Dead Knight Empire. Although very few people in the Forsaken Land knew of the existence of the Dead Knight Empire. However, the Dead Knight Empire was the true peak power in the entire Forsaken Land. I really can't say it. Yi Chunxiang raised her head with difficulty and looked at Nie Tian in horror. She was actually still unwilling to say it. Nie Tian narrowed his eyes and felt very strange. Yi Chunxiang was so afraid of death, yet she didn't even say anything. Could it be that there was some huge secret behind the 9 Hearts demonic lotus? 7th Prince, you have one last chance to speak. Nie Tian's face suddenly darkened. He said in a cold tone, "If you say something I don't want to hear, then you will die." As the word die fell, it was like a 5,000 catty boulder smashing into Yi Chunxiang's heart. He felt his entire body rumble and the whole world go dark. He could see that Nie Tian was really determined to kill at this moment. That stern gaze was definitely not a bluff. If he didn't say anything about the 9 Hearts demonic lotus, Nie Tian would definitely kill him directly. He really couldn't understand. The 9 Hearts demonic lotus was the Yi clan secret. How did Nie Tian know? Nie Tian had said that he was determined to obtain the 9 Hearts demonic lotus. The 9 Hearts demonic lotus was too important to Nie Tian. This was not only related to whether Lin Shun could activate the 9 primordial divine seal, but also related to the improvement of Nie Tian's own strength. As long as he could obtain the 9 Hearts demonic lotus, he could absorb the power of the demonic Lotus 9 flames and ascend to the highest realm. That was a qualitative leap. Nie Tian definitely wouldn't let go of such a great opportunity. I'll speak. Yi Chunxiang's eyes trembled incessantly. He finally raised his head to look at Nie Tian and said with a trembling voice, "The 9 Heart demonic lotus is right behind you." Yi Chunxiang was about to say the information about the 9 Hearts demonic lotus, but at this moment, something strange happened. "Shut up!" A deep, sinister voice rang out in the sky. Then, the air suddenly trembled, and a streak of black light shot down from the sky towards Nie Tian with murderous intent. What a fierce aura! Nie Tian felt the fierce aura in the void and couldn't help but narrow his eyes and exclaim in his heart. But he reacted quickly. A pair of wings appeared on his back. With a sudden flap, his figure retreated 100 meters away and cleverly avoided the attack of the black light. Another night elf. Nie Tian stabilized his figure and immediately felt that the aura of the black light was clearly the devouring power of the night. Clearly, the person who came was also a night elf like Yi Chunxiang. 5th brother. At this moment, Yi Chunxiang suddenly raised his head. His originally despairing eyes revealed an unconcealable passion, like a dying person suddenly grasping at straws. 7th brother, you idiot. Why are you here? Then, an angry roar came from the void. It was like rolling thunder with a vast and mighty aura. 5th brother, save me. Yi Chunxiang couldn't care less at this moment. He struggled to stand up and actually wanted to escape. Escape? Can you escape? At this moment, Nie Tianling laughed and directly stabbed with his sword. Instantly, a murderous sword shadow whizzed out and attacked Yi Chunxiang. Don't kill him. The person in the void in the distance suddenly saw this scene and couldn't help but cry out. He was clearly very flustered. He didn't expect that Nie Tian would actually dare to kill Yi Chunxiang. Yi Chunxiang's figure walked clumsily. Suddenly, he felt a terrifying pressure behind him. He struggled to turn around and open his mouth, saying, "I'm the 7th prince of the Dead Knight Empire." You can't. He used the last of his strength to finish the last sentence, but he couldn't finish it. The moment the sword shadow fell, a bloody light appeared in the space. Yi Chunxiang's fate was to die without a corpse left. This. The crowd watched from afar and couldn't help but gasp at the bloody scene. Nietion's methods were really too ruthless. He actually dared to kill directly. Although the crowd didn't know Yi Qinxiang's true identity, someone who could loudly reprimand the crown princess of the Yinhua Empire couldn't be ordinary. Was Nietion not afraid of the force behind him retaliating by killing Yi Qinxiang? On the other side, Yin Xinyue's beautiful eyes trembled when she saw Nietion kill Yi Qinxiang with a sword. She shouted in her heart with joy, "Good kill." This sentence was not only because Yin Xinyue hated Yi Qinxiang. It was also because this sword made Nietion and the Dead Knight Empire stand on the absolute opposite side. Nietion killed the 7th prince of the Dead Knight Empire, and the people of the Dead Knight Empire definitely wouldn't let it go. This sword made Nietion and the Dead Knight Empire form an irreconcilable feud. Bastard! How dare you kill the prince of the Dead Knight Empire? The next moment, a figure in black descended from the sky and stood at the place where Yi Qinxiang died. A pair of cold eyes, like a venomous wolf, stared at Nietion. Chapter 22:14. The 5th prince of the dying Knight Empire, Yi Chunfeng, hovered in the air, staring at Nietion like a venomous wolf in the night. At this moment, Yi Chunfeng's eyes were filled with anger and killing intent as he looked at Nietion. He had never imagined that Nietion would dare to kill Yi Qinxiang right in front of him. Nietion's expression was very calm as he looked at Yi Chunfeng. There was no fear in his eyes, only a hint of playfulness. "You've got some nerve, you brat." Upon seeing Nietion's calm demeanor, Yi Chunfeng, who was about to attack him, couldn't help but let out a cold roar. Nietion had already scanned Yi Chunfeng with his divine sense, and he was very surprised. Yi Chunfeng was as strong as Yi Qinxiang, a late paramount god. However, his aura was far stronger than Yi Qinxiang's, especially the dark energy that surged around him. It was many times stronger than Yi Qinxiang's. There was no question that Yi Chunfeng's bloodline power was much stronger than Yi Qinxiang's. In some ways, bloodline power represented a cultivator's talent. Therefore, Yi Chunfeng's strength and talent were both far above Yi Qinxiang's. "What's your relationship with the 7th prince I killed? Who are you?" Nietion smiled faintly and asked in a very calm manner. His voice was flat, and his expression was calm. At this moment, Nietion didn't seem the least bit flustered. Yi Chunfeng stared at Nietion and said cold, "I am Yi Chunfeng, the 5th prince of the dying Knight Empire. The person you just killed was my 7th brother, Yi Qinxiang." Yi Chunfeng's eyes flashed. "You don't know what kind of power the dying Knight Empire is, do you, brat?" In his opinion, Nietion didn't know about the dying Knight Empire. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared to kill Yi Qinxiang even if he had 100 gallbladders. After all, Yi Qinxiang was the 7th prince of the dying Knight Empire. Killing Yi Qinxiang was equivalent to forming an irreconcilable enmity with the passing Knight Empire. In the entire Abandoned Land, the number of forces that dared to provoke the passing Knight Empire could be counted on one hand. Moreover, they were all hidden great forces. If Nietion knew Yi Qinxiang's identity and still wanted to kill her, it would undoubtedly mean that he was a lunatic. So what if you know? So what if I don't know? Nietion looked at Yi Chunfeng and sneered in disdain. Then he insipidly said, "Your 7th brother wants to kill me, so I can't let him live." Yi Chunfeng's eyebrows sank when he heard Nietion's words. His expression instantly became gloomy. Nietion's attitude was completely unexpected. "Boy, what's your name?" Yi Chunfeng frowned and asked in a cold tone. "Nietion." Nietion replied indifferently. Yi Chunfeng's gaze trembled slightly when he heard the 2 words Nietion. He seemed to have suddenly thought of something. His expression was a little surprised, and he thought to himself, "A few days ago, Big Brother mentioned a person to me. I think he's also called Nietion. Could it be this boy?" The name Nietion made Yi Chunfeng think of something. It turned out that a few days ago, his big brother, the crown prince of the passing Knight Empire, Yi Qinli, told him that he was going to kill a person called Nietion. At that time, Yi Chunfeng was still very curious about who this Nietion was to actually make Yi Qinli take action personally. Yi Chunli didn't say much to him at that time. He only said that Nye Tian must die. Yi Chunfeng faintly felt that the Nye Tian in front of him and the Nye Tian that Yi Chunli spoke of were very likely to be the same person. He was very curious about Nye Tian's background, to actually make the crown prince of the passing Night Empire take action personally. But at that moment, he suddenly realized that Nye Tian's strength was actually only at the peak of the overgod level. This discovery made his eyes narrow, and he was extremely shocked. He knew that Yi Qinxiang's strength was at the late overgod level. Coupled with the Yi family's unique bloodline power, the Dark Knight Devourer, she could even easily deal with a peak overgod expert. But now, Yi Qinxiang had actually died at the hands of a peak overgod expert. How could he not be shocked? Yi Qinfeng's first reaction was that it was impossible. But the next moment, he calmed down a lot and asked in a deep voice, "Nye Tian, who exactly are you?" Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he asked indifferently, "Who do you think I am?" He could tell that Yi Qinfeng seemed to be somewhat familiar with his name. But Yi Qinfeng's current reaction was a little strange. It was as if he wasn't here to kill Nye Tian, but for something else. "I don't care who you are, but you killed a prince of the passing Night Empire. The only ending for you is death." Yi Qinfeng growled, and he took a step forward. The dark aura around his body instantly surged, turning into a surging pressure that enveloped Nye Tian. The corners of Nye Tian's mouth twitched. His whole body surged with sore momentum, and he easily broke Yi Qinfeng's imposing aura. Then, he said with a cold smile, "Fifth Prince, do you think you can kill me with just your imposing aura? Should I say that you're too naive, or that you're too stupid? Kid, you're too arrogant." Yi Qinfeng frowned, and he roared, "You've angered me." With that, Yi Qinfeng no longer hesitated. He moved, turning into a ray of black light, and a black storm appeared in the surrounding space. It was like a huge beast of darkness, and it pounced at Nye Tian. What a terrifying aura! The crowd, who were tens of thousands of meters away, suddenly felt a suffocating pressure. They immediately screamed and retreated. In Xianyue, who was watching coldly from the sidelines, couldn't help but have her beautiful eyes flicker. She was very surprised and thought to herself, "This fifth prince's battle prowess is several times stronger than Yi Qinxiang's. Nye Tian is definitely no match for him." In midair, Nye Tian felt Yi Qinfeng's aura, and his eyes darkened. He was shocked. He knew that Yi Qinfeng was stronger than Yi Qinxiang, but he didn't expect him to be so much stronger. Both Yi Qinxiang and Yi Qinfeng were late-stage paramount gods, but the former's strength was equivalent to a peak paramount god, while the latter's strength was close to the peak of the god state. Nye Tian estimated that Yi Qinfeng's strength was definitely not weaker than Mizuhara's. In an instant, he reacted, and the three forbidden skills were activated again. His aura surged, and he slashed out with the Starlight Heavenly Slash. At the same time, the starlight wings on his back flapped, and his figure instantly retreated. Yi Qinfeng's aura was too strong. If they fought head-on, Nye Tian would suffer a great loss. Nye Tian had just killed Yi Qinxiang, and had almost exhausted the god-fiend power in his body, so his current strength was greatly reduced. It would be too stupid to fight head-on with Yi Qinfeng under such circumstances. Therefore, he chose to attack instead of defend, and avoided a head-on confrontation. Kaboom! In the next moment, a thunderous sound was heard, and the sword shadow collapsed under the impact of the black storm. The boundless, devouring power of the night swept over like a raging wave. Chapter 22:15. Bang! A muffled sound came from the void as Nye Tian's figure was sent flying hundreds of meters away. He steadied his body and stared at Yi Qinfeng with shining eyes. Yi Qinfeng's strength had exceeded Nye Tian's expectations. He was much stronger than Yi Qinxiang. To kill Yi Qinxiang, Nye Tian had already unleashed his full power. It was too much for him to face an expert like Yi Qinfeng now. Not dead. Yi Qinfeng's voice sounded in the darkness. He seemed a little surprised. Originally, he had assumed that his Dark Night Tempest would be enough to kill Nye Tian. Who would have thought that Nietion's reaction speed would be so terrifying. What surprised him even more was that Nietion's martial body did not seem to be afraid of the Dark Knight devouring power. This was really strange. The Dark Knight devouring power was a bloodline power that directly devoured the breath of life. What kind of power was hidden in Nietion's body that he was not afraid of the Dark Knight devouring power? Yi Chen-feng did not know that Nietion had already been hit by the Dark Knight devouring power once. Nietion's martial body was very strong and adaptable. It was much easier for him to face the Dark Knight devouring power. This person's combat strength is really terrifying. I can't continue to tangle with him. Nietion thought to himself. He could not help but glance at the Thousand Demons cave behind him. If there was no other choice, he was prepared to enter a cave and hide temporarily. However, he could still hold on. Although it was unlikely that he could kill Yi Chen-feng, he still had the ability to protect himself. Most importantly, he still had a huge question in his mind. It was the Nine Hearts demonic lotus. Nietion, the fifth prince's body, also has the aura of the Nine Hearts demonic lotus. Fat Cat guessed what Nietion was thinking and reminded him. Nietion nodded slightly. The corners of his mouth twitched. He looked at Yi Chen-feng provocatively and said, Yi Chen-feng, the Yi clan's bloodline power is only a so-so. Compared to the Dark Knight devouring power, I am more interested in the Nine Hearts demonic lotus in your body. Nine Hearts demon lotus. Yi Chen-feng's pupil shrank as he heard these words. He was very surprised and blurted out, How do you know about the Nine Hearts demon lotus? Nietion saw Yi Chen-feng's reaction, and the corners of his mouth slightly raised. He suddenly said, Your Royal Highness, you came here for the Nine Hearts demon lotus, right? You? Yi Chen-feng's face froze, and his eyes were filled with astonishment. Although he didn't finish his words, his expression clearly said, How did you know? Yi Chen-feng hadn't come to the Thousand Devils cave to kill Nietion. Instead, he had come for the Nine Cores demon lotus. In reality, he didn't know that his seventh brother, Yi Chen-xiang, had also come here, so when he saw Yi Chen-xiang, he was very surprised. The news that he had come to the Thousand Demons Cave was only known to the members of the Yi clan's royal family. However, Nietion had directly said that he had come for the Nine Hearts demon lotus. This was just too weird. The Nine Hearts demon lotus was the Yi clan's biggest secret. No one knew about it. So how did Nietion know? Did Old Seven tell you? Yi Chen-feng's eyes flickered, and he suddenly asked. He didn't tell me because you stopped him just as he was about to say it. Nietion smiled faintly, and the corners of his mouth brimmed with a proud smile. He raised his eyebrows and said, If I said I guessed it, would you believe me? Yi Chen-feng's face stiffened, and he immediately roared, You're lying. The Nine Hearts demon lotus was the Yi clan's secret. How could Yi Chen-feng believe that Nietion had actually guessed it? You don't believe me? Nietion laughed, and suddenly turned to look at the Thousand Demons cave behind him. He said, Your Royal Highness, not only did I guess that you came for the Nine Hearts demon lotus, but I also guessed that the Nine Hearts demon lotus is in the Thousand Demons cave, right? It had to be said that the information that Yi Chen-feng had come for the Nine Hearts demon lotus was indeed a wild guess on Nietion's part. He didn't expect that he had actually guessed correctly. When Nietion mentioned the Nine Hearts demon lotus, Yi Chen-feng's reaction was exactly the same as Yi Chen-xiang's. In addition, Yi Chen-xiang would rather die than say anything about the Nine Hearts demon lotus. This further proved that the Nine Hearts demon lotus was very important. Yi Chen-feng and Yi Chen-xiang both had the Nine Hearts demon lotus in their bodies, and the Nine Hearts demon lotus wasn't the Yi clan's bloodline power. This was very strange. Therefore, Nietion guessed that the Nine Hearts demon lotus was very likely a Yi clan secret. Just now, Nietion had already seen that Yi Chen-feng hadn't come to kill him. On the contrary, when Yi Chen-feng saw him, he had a very surprised reaction. This meant that Yi Chen-feng had most likely come to the Thousand Devils cave for another matter. Nietion casually guessed in his heart, and for some reason, he thought of the Nine Hearts demon lotus. Then, he casually said it, and unexpectedly he was right. Yi Qinfeng's surprised reaction told Nietian that he had come for the Nine Hearts Demon Lotus. After confirming this, Nietian thought that the Nine Hearts Demon Lotus was very likely to be in one of the caves in the Thousand Demons Cave. Yi Qinfeng's face slightly stiffened, and he couldn't say anything. His gaze almost involuntarily shifted, and then he immediately retracted it. However, such a small movement was captured by Nietian's keen senses. Fifth floor, cave number 99. Nietian's eyes suddenly flickered, and he suddenly said. When Yi Qinfeng heard Nietian's words, his eyes suddenly widened, and his expression stiffened. His whole body was petrified, because the cave Nietian mentioned was the cave where the Nine Hearts Demon Lotus was. Sure enough, Nietian looked at the embarrassed and stiff expression of Yi Qinfeng, and in his heart, he cried out in surprise. He was very sure that the Nine Hearts Demon Lotus was in the fifth floor, cave number 99. Just a moment ago, Yi Qinfeng's gaze shifted to the fifth floor, cave number 99, and Nietian caught this moment, so he understood everything. The Nine Hearts Demon Lotus was the Yi clan's biggest secret. A long time ago, an ancestor of the Yi clan entered the fifth floor, cave number 99, and found the Nine Hearts Demon Lotus. From then on, the Nine Hearts Demon Lotus became the Yi clan's biggest secret. The Nine Hearts Demon Lotus absorbed the power of the nine primordial energies of heaven and earth. When a martial artist absorbed the power of the Nine Hearts Demon Lotus, not only could they increase their strength, but they could also increase their martial talent. However, the Nine Hearts Demon Lotus had a very long growth period, and it took 1,000 years for it to bloom. Therefore, every 1,000 years, the members of the Yi clan would enter cave number 99 on the fifth floor. Only a few people could enter the fifth floor, cave number 99, so the Yi clan did not set up any protection. They felt that setting up protection would instead attract other people's attention. The Yi clan had kept the secret of a Nine Hearts Demon Lotus for hundreds of thousands of years. Unexpectedly, today it was actually leaked by Yi Qinfeng in such a strange way. The reason why Yi Qinfeng came to the Thousand Demons Cave this time was to enter the fifth floor, cave number 99, and pick the Nine Hearts Demon Lotus. Chapter 22:16. Nietian, now that you know the secret of the Nine Hearts Demon Lotus, I can't let you live. Yi Qinfeng said coldly, his eyes surging with killing intent. He still didn't understand that he was the one who leaked the secret of the Nine Hearts Demon Lotus to Nietian. Nietianling smiled coldly and said, You want to kill me? I'm afraid you don't have the ability to do so. Arrogant. Yi Qinfeng roared, and then his figure moved. The dark aura around his body suddenly soared again, and an incomparably violent aura filled the air. The space within 10,000 meters was instantly shrouded in darkness. What a strong person! The crowd's eyes trembled as they exclaimed in unison. Yi Qinfeng's aura was really too strong. Even if the crowd was tens of thousands of meters away, they could clearly feel the oppressive aura, making it hard for them to breathe. Boom! 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 At this time, there was a violent roar in the air. Black storms appeared, like giant black snakes, rolling and roaring in the air. The dark aura seemed to want to devour everything. This guy's bloodline power is so strong. Nietian couldn't help but frown as he felt the aura in the void. Yi Qinfeng's aura was getting stronger and stronger, and his whole body seemed to be integrated with the darkness. Only black storms could be seen in the air, but Yi Qinfeng's figure was nowhere to be seen. Yi Qinfeng's bloodline power was really strong. No wonder he could enter the fifth layer of the cave. Nietian, prepare to die. Then a fierce roar came from the sky, like a roar from hell, full of strong, killing intent. Boom! 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 The next moment, 3 dark storms appeared, shrouding from 3 different directions and surrounding Nietian. The dark storms rotated violently in the air, standing upright between heaven and earth, like a dark tyrannosaurus that wanted to devour the whole world. All of a sudden, 3 dark night windstorms appeared and shot towards Nietian. In the face of such a strong dark night devouring power, Nietion felt the blood and chi in his body become restless, as if it would burst out of his body at any moment. At the critical moment, his silhouette abruptly trembled as the 9 dragon veins in his body revolved frenziedly, stabilizing his blood and chi. At the same time, he activated his astral soul shield as the astral wings on his back shook violently. His silhouette soared up into the skies, resembling a sharp sword that sliced apart the heavens. Around him, the sword momentum surged and was extremely sharp. He actually broke through the impact of the dark night storm and directly leaped tens of thousands of meters into the sky. Trying to escape? Seeing this, Yi Qinfeng sneered and said in a deep voice, "Do you think you can escape from my dark night storm?" Nietion's strength was indeed beyond Yi Qinfeng's imagination. However, the latter still had the confidence to kill Nietion. His dark night storm was condensed from the dark night devouring power. The kind of devouring power it had towards blood and chi was unimaginable. Nietion, you'll soon find out that you're doomed to be a tragedy in front of me. Yi Qinfeng's grim voice faded, and a strange scene took place. Wah, wah, wah. Suddenly, a strange sound came from the void. The 3 dark night storms actually split apart, instantly turning into 9 dark night storms. 1 dark night storm turned into 3, 3 into 9. The aura of the 9 dark night storms did not weaken in the slightest. Instead, it became even more violent. Seeing this scene, Nietion could not help but narrow his eyes. It seemed that the dark night storms were more difficult to deal with than he had expected. Boom, boom, boom. In the next moment, the 9 dark night storms were like 9 wild dragons that soared into the sky and directly rushed towards Nietion. Sensing the dark night storm's aura, Nietion's expression couldn't help but change. The dark night storms were really too tyrannical. Even if Nietion had a martial body, if he was hit head-on, he would at least lose a layer of skin. The wings behind Nietion flapped crazily, and the power of the stars in his body continuously gushed out. When the star soul wings were fully spread out, they were actually as large as 1,000 meters. His figure was like a giant bird, flying high in the sky at high speed. And behind him, the 9 dark night storms were closely chasing him, like maggots in a tarsal bone. He could not get rid of them no matter how hard he tried. Stinking brat, this prince wants to see just how fast you are. Yi Qinfeng looked at Nietion from afar, and his eyes suddenly became cold. He suddenly moved his feet, and his whole body turned into a black light, rushing straight towards Nietion. Nietion flapped his wings with all his might and relied on his speed to deal with the 9 dark night storms. But under such circumstances, the power of the stars in his body was consumed very quickly. Even the power of 800 billion stars would not be able to support him for long. But he absolutely could not stop at this time. Once he stopped, he would be hit by the 9 dark night storms head-on and would be torn to pieces in an instant. And the most troublesome thing was that Nietion felt that the power of the stars in his wings was slowly absorbing the power of the dark night storms. The power of the stars was the origin of power and had the power to devour the heavens. Even the devouring power of the dark night could not compete with the power of the stars. The star soul wings devouring the dark night storms was originally a good thing because it was equivalent to enhancing Nietion's strength. But the dark night storms contained a terrible devouring power of the dark night, which could devour the breath of life. This was simply fatal for Nietion's martial body. Therefore, he had now fallen into a very strange state. His strength was increasing, but his breath of life was weakening. In just a blink of an eye, Nietion's face became as pale as a sheet of paper. No, I have to think of a way to destroy the 9 dark night storms. Nietion's eyes were filled with determination. If he continued to absorb the energy of the dark night storms, the blood in his body would become extremely violent, and there was a high possibility that it would distort time and space. At that time, the worst-case scenario would be Nietion self-detonating. Starfire C. Incineration. With this thought in mind, Nietion stopped in midair, turned around, and slashed out with his sword. Instantly, a blazing sword appeared. Like a raging fire dragon, it slashed towards one of the dark night windstorms, wreathed in raging flames. Kaboom! The flaming sword shadow and the dark night storms collided, and the two powerful forces collapsed at the same time. Terrifying waves of chi wreaked havoc in the air. Bang! And at this moment, because Nietion's body stopped moving, he was hit by a dark night storm and was directly sent flying. In midair, he flapped his star soul wings and instantly stabilized himself. That was close. Fortunately, his martial body was strong, and coupled with the abnormal recovery ability of the Earth Vein Source, this attack did not cause any fatal injuries to him. But at this time, Nietion suddenly felt an extremely sharp aura rushing towards him, causing his heart to tremble. Of the 9 dark night storms, 1 had been destroyed, leaving 8. However, Yi Qinfeng had unexpectedly rushed over at this time. His whole body was like a black lightning bolt, and he was rushing over to attack. Oh no! In an instant, Nietion sensed danger. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he quickly reacted by activating the Heaven Shrouding Totem. Chapter 22:17. In the sky, Yi Qinfeng rushed toward Nietion. Nietion reacted instantly and activated the Shrouding Sky Totem at the critical moment. The Shrouding Sky Totem was born from the first layer of the Star River. Nietion had not used it for a long time. Now that he used it, it was unexpectedly powerful. The Heaven Shadowing Totem around Nietion continued to fold and form a sphere of starlight that enveloped him from head to toe. Boom! Crack! The next moment, Yi Qinfeng, like a sharp awl, hit the Shrouding Sky Totem heavily. After a violent crash, there was a harsh tearing sound. Bang! A crack appeared in the Shrouding Sky Totem, instantly like a spider web, and then the whole Shrouding Sky Totem collapsed. Ha ha, go to hell! At the same time, Yi Qinfeng's voice sounded very harsh, resounding in the void, seeming violent and bloody. The one who is going to die is you. However, in the next moment, after the sky-covering totem collapsed, a blood-red sword shadow appeared. At the same time, a cold voice rang out. It was Nietion. Yi Qinfeng obviously did not expect that after the Shrouding Sky Totem was broken, Nietion was not injured at all, and even attacked him. Bang! Caught off guard, Yi Qinfeng was directly hit by the bloody sword shadow. With a muffled sound, his figure flew out, drawing a bloody trail in the air. At the same time, the remaining 8 dark night storms instantly weakened a lot. Nietion seized the opportunity and slashed out with his sword. The mighty sword shadow fell straight down, directly chopping the 8 dark night storms into pieces. His figure also took a step forward. His entire body was covered in a blood-red color, and a violent aura continuously circulated around him, causing him to look like a god of death. The crowd saw the scene in the sky and could not help but gasp, shocked and speechless. Who would have thought that Nietion could still fight back in a situation where his strength was crushed? What was even more strange was that Nietion's sword seemed to have seriously injured Yi Qinfeng. How is this possible? Yin Xianyue stared at Nietion from afar, her eyes trembling and her pretty face about to stiffen. She had originally thought that Yi Qinfeng would kill Nietion without a doubt. She hadn't expected that Nietion would fight back. At this moment, Nietion was standing high up in the sky. His body was covered in blood, and his face was as pale as paper. However, his eyes were as bright as ever and extremely determined. The Heaven Shrouding Totem had helped him block Yi Qinfeng's fatal blow and had also given him an opportunity to fight back. It had to be said that Yi Qinfeng had been too careless. He had thought that he would be able to kill Nietion in one move. However, he didn't expect that Nietion's martial body was far stronger than he had imagined. It was precisely because of his overconfidence that he was unprepared and was hit by Nietion's sword in an instant. At this moment, Yi Qinfeng's figure was standing in the sky below Nietion. One of his arms was gone, and half of his body was dyed red with blood. Nietion's sword just now didn't kill him, but it had shattered one of his arms. He had never thought that Nietion would be able to fight back in such a desperate situation. Damn it! Suddenly, Yi Qinfeng roared. He looked like a wild beast that was about to go berserk. His eyes were surging with terrifying flames. Yi Qinfeng, I've said that if you want to kill me, you have to show your true strength. At this moment, Niet Tian's body shook, and the blood on his body surged away. He regained his fierce aura and said, "Unfortunately, your strength is only SOSO. Is that so?" Yi Qinfeng was provoked. He immediately roared and said furiously, "Niet Tian, I was careless and was injured by you. But don't think that you can escape just like that. Your injuries right now are much more severe than mine. As long as I want to, I can still kill you easily." Yi Qinfeng's fighting strength was undoubtedly greatly reduced after losing one of his arms. However, Niet Tian's current state was obviously worse than his. He could clearly feel that Niet Tian's aura was very unstable, and the blood chi in his body was very restless. However, the strange thing was that the aura around Niet Tian was very terrifying. "Yi Qinfeng, you are too arrogant. Who said that I want to escape?" The corners of Niet Tian's mouth raised into a strange smile. He said in a cold tone, "Now it's time for me to fight back." After saying this, his aura skyrocketed at a crazy speed, resulting in rumbling gusts of chi, resulting in a terrifying sight. How is this possible? Yi Qinfeng's eyes couldn't help but tremble when he saw this scene. He actually cried out in shock. Niet Tian had no intention of escaping. He was going to kill Yi Qinfeng. Yi Qinfeng's expression was somewhat blank because he couldn't understand why Niet Tian's aura was clearly weakening and becoming unstable, but his aura was still soaring. This was simply too strange. However, in the next moment, something even stranger happened. Rumble. Niet Tian's energy skyrocketed as he broke through to the peak paramount god level. Niet Tian's eyes narrowed slightly in the face of this sudden situation. Obviously, he also did not expect this. His aura was indeed weakening, but his energy was growing stronger. That was because he had just absorbed a huge amount of the dark night devouring power. The power of the stars was the essence of power and could devour anything and everything. It was precisely because of this that the life aura in his body was constantly weakening, but his strength was constantly increasing. Thanks to the dark night devouring power, Niet Tian had broken through to the peak paramount god level. Of course, it came at a huge price. His martial body was suffering unimaginable pain, and his blood energy was seething, as though he were on the verge of burning up. "Niet Tian, you? How can your strength?" Yi Qinfeng cried out in shock when he realized that Niet Tian's strength had suddenly broken through. He couldn't finish his sentence. "Yi Qinfeng, this sword is going to take your life." Niet Tian Tianling chuckled as he endured the pain. Mouth twitching, he blurred into motion, his blood energy and sword will exploding. Rumble. The starry sky slashed downwards, and a blood-red sword shadow that was 10,000 meters long appeared. It was like a blood dragon as it crashed down towards Yi Qinfeng. My God, what's going on? When everyone saw the huge sword fall from the sky, they couldn't help letting out cries of shock. It was like a blood-red waterfall had covered half the sky. They couldn't help feeling shocked. How could Niet Tian, who had been in a disadvantageous position before, suddenly be so strong that he was going to kill Yi Qinfeng? Don't! Yi Qinfeng let out a scream when he felt the terrifying sword momentum approaching. He was so shocked that he completely forgot to resist. He just stood there motionlessly. It was a move that Niet Tian had unleashed after breaking through to the peak paramount god level, making it far more powerful than anything he had ever unleashed in the past. Chapter 22:18. Boom! The blood-red sword shadow roared like a dragon and instantly pressed down on Yi Qinfeng. Yi Qinfeng felt that the pressure around him was getting stronger and stronger. It was getting more and more terrifying. He could really feel the aura of death. He was completely scared and stood there motionless like a piece of wood. 100 meters, 50 meters, 10 meters. The blood-red sword shadow was about to fall, but at the moment of life and death, a sudden change occurred. Boom! In the void, a horrible black palm shadow fell and directly fell on the blood-red sword shadow. Boom! Crack, crack, crack. In an instant, The blood-red sword shadow suddenly shook under the impact of the black palm shadow. Then, the sword body suddenly cracked and collapsed. Chi, chi, chi. The terrible power directly rushed out and raged into space. However, a giant hand fell down at this moment and grabbed Yi Chenfeng. Then, it took him away from the center of the collision where the billows of qi were rolling. Standing in the distance, Nie Tian felt the terrifying impact, which caused his whole body to tremble violently. Immediately afterwards, he was pushed back dozens of meters, almost losing his balance and falling to the ground. What a terrible palm! He stabilized his body and suddenly raised his head to look at the sky. As far as his eyes could see, there was a figure in black standing there. His black robe fluttered in the wind. His long silver hair was unruly and evil, and his handsome face was incomparably enchanting. The person who saved Yi Chenfeng and forced Nie Tian to retreat at the moment of life and death was this martial artist in black. Nie Tian's pupils shrank slightly. He immediately confirmed that the person who came should be Yi Chenfeng's brother, because this martial artist in black looked 70% similar to Yi Chenfeng, but he was more handsome than the latter. The sudden scene made everyone's eyes narrow. Then, they all looked at the man in black in shock. This man in black had just arrived, but he blocked Nie Tian's powerful sword with one palm and forced Nie Tian to retreat. One could imagine his strength. Big brother. At this moment, Yi Chenfeng realized that he was not dead. Then, he looked at the man in black and shouted in surprise. Big brother? When Yinxia heard Yi Chenfeng's groan, her beautiful eyes flickered and she said in surprise, "He is the crown prince of the Dead Knight Empire, Yi Chenli." Yi Chenfeng was the 5th prince of the Dead Knight Empire. So his elder brother was obviously the crown prince of the Dead Knight Empire. Yin Xinyue's guess was right. The person who came was none other than the Dead Knight crown prince, Yi Chenli. After confirming Yi Chenli's identity, Yin Xinyue couldn't help but gulp. He felt that his lips were a little dry. She had never imagined that the Dead Knight crown prince would appear here. Yi Chenli. Others might not be familiar with this name, but Yinxia knew that this person was truly an extremely talented person. In the abandoned land, there was a proud son of heaven ranking. It was a ranking of the strength and talent of the young geniuses of the abandoned land. The prodigy role, as the name suggested, represented the pride of the heavens. The entire prodigy role only recorded 9 people. It was not an exaggeration to say that those who could enter the prodigy role were absolute geniuses that were 1 in a billion. However, ordinary people didn't know about this prodigy role. Only the true top forces knew about it. Yinxia was known as a genius that appeared once in a million years in the Yingyue Empire, but her talent couldn't even be seen on the prodigy role. And she knew that the Dead Knight Crown Prince, Yi Chenli, was one of the 9 prodigies. In other words, Yi Chenli's talent ranked in the top 9 in the abandoned land. There were at least tens of billions of people in the abandoned land. To be able to rank in the top 9 among so many people, one could imagine the strength of his talent. The 5th prince, Yi Chenfeng, and the 7th prince, Yi Chenxiang, were also people with top talent. However, in front of the Dead Knight Crown Prince, Yi Chenli, the 2 of them were practically trash. It was because of her understanding of Yi Chenli that Yinxia was so surprised that the former would actually appear here. Old 5 stepped down. Right at this moment, Yi Chenli finally spoke. His eyes stared at Nie Tian, and he said indifferently, "His life is mine." His voice was very calm, and so was his gaze. It was as if he was having a casual conversation. But the more it was like this, the more it showed that Yi Chenli was an extremely terrifying person. Yi Chenfeng was stunned for a moment, and then he seemed to realize something. He said in shock, "Big brother, your strength." Yi Chenli obviously knew what Yi Chenfeng was puzzled about. He smiled faintly and said calmly, "In order to kill him, I destroyed my own martial arts foundation and lowered my strength to the late stage of the paramount god." This! Yi Chenfeng was stunned when he heard Yi Chenli's words, and he couldn't say anything for a long time. He knew that Yi Chenli was going to kill someone called Nie Tian. And he also guessed that this Nye Tian in front of him was the person Yi Chunli wanted to kill. But he never would have thought that Yi Chunli would destroy his own martial arts foundation in order to kill Nye Tian and forcibly reduce his cultivation from the peak of the Paramount God stage to the late stage of the Paramount God stage. He completely couldn't understand why Yi Chunli would do this. To Yi Chunli, killing Nye Tian was absolutely a piece of cake. Why would he destroy his own martial arts foundation? On the other side, Nye Tian heard Yi Chunli's words and immediately understood. He smiled faintly and said, "Very good. Looks like you're someone who follows the rules of the game." This Yi Chunli was really ruthless. In order to kill Nye Tian, he actually destroyed his own martial arts foundation. To a martial artist, the martial arts foundation was equivalent to their martial arts talent. Once it was destroyed, not only would their cultivation base decline, even their martial arts talent would decline. A super monstrous martial artist like Yi Chunli should value martial arts talent a lot. But in order to kill Nye Tian, he actually didn't hesitate to destroy his own martial arts foundation. His ruthlessness could be seen at a glance. A person who could even make a move on himself. Who else would he care about? Nye Tian looked at Yi Chunli. The latter's eyes didn't seem to change at all. They were in a state of emptiness and indifference, as if everything in the outside world didn't exist to him. Furthermore, Nye Tian even sensed an extremely terrifying sword intent from Yi Chunli's body. This kind of sword intent was sharp and cold. It was extremely terrifying. Without a doubt, Yi Chunli was a swordsman. Moreover, he was an exceptionally terrifying swordsman. "You're very smart. I came here for you." Yi Chunli looked at Nye Tian with a cold expression and said, "I'll give you two choices. Come with me, or die." His ice-cold voice was extremely cold, as if he didn't have any emotions. "Do you think that I'm someone who can be manipulated at will?" Nye Tian smiled faintly. The corners of his mouth curled into a strange smile, as if he had discovered something. "Since that's the case, then I'll take it as your choice. Die," Yi Chunli said coldly. As he spoke, his figure moved and actually walked toward Nye Tian step by step. With every step he took, the sword intent all over his body became a little stronger. When he arrived at a place that was less than 1,000 meters away from Nye Tian, the sword intent all over his body had already become so strong that it made one's hair stand on end. Pinnacle of sword and martial arts as one. Nye Tian looked at Yi Chunli, and his pupils constricted slightly as he exclaimed in his heart. Chapter 22:19. This person's swordsmanship is so strong. Sensing the Dead Knight Crown Prince, Yi Chunli's swordsmanship realm, Nye Tian's gaze trembled slightly, and he couldn't help but exclaim in his heart. Yi Chunli wasn't considered old. Within the godly state, he was definitely a young martial artist. However, his swordsmanship realm had already reached the peak of the realm of integration of sword and martial arts. More importantly, he had just destroyed his martial arts foundation not long ago. In other words, before he destroyed his martial arts foundation, his swordsmanship realm was at least the legendary realm of integration of sword and martial arts, or even higher. Right now, Nye Tian didn't know what the swordsmanship realm after the legendary realm was, but he firmly believed that it wasn't the end, but a new starting point. There was no end to martial arts. Swordsmanship was just an extreme martial art, and the realm was unimaginable. After destroying his martial arts foundation, Yi Chunli was still able to maintain the peak of integration of sword and martial arts. His talent in swordsmanship could be said to be shocking. At this moment, Yi Chunli's figure had already arrived, and he was only a few hundred meters away from Nye Tian. Nye Tian felt the terrifying sword aura around Yi Chunli. It was as if there was a mountain condensed from sword while standing in front of him. The powerful aura was extremely terrifying. However, at this moment, Yi Chunli's figure suddenly froze, and a cold light was released from his eyes. He stared at Nye Tian and said, "Nye Tian, I'll give you one more chance. Come with me. My master doesn't want to see a corpse." "Your master?" Nye Tian's entire body was surging with sword will, and he resisted Yi Chunli's sword aura. His gaze froze, and he immediately reacted. He said, "If I'm not wrong, your master is Anya Minjia, right? Since you know, then you should be more sensible. Come with me, Yi Chunli replied indifferently, and his tone was extremely threatening. His master was one of the three legendary swordsmen, Sword Sage Anya Minjia. Nie Tian was no stranger to Anya Minjia. He had seen the latter fight before, and he was an existence that was close to a sage. Yi Chunli was Anya Minjia's disciple. No wonder his swordsmanship realm was so terrifying. Judging from Yi Chunli's aura, his combat ability should be similar to Xian Zongfeng's. Impossible, Nie Tianlin replied coldly. At the same time, his body shook, and the sword aura around him instantly surged, forcefully pushing away Yi Chunli's sword aura pressure. Yi Chunli was forced to take a step back. His pair of cold eyes instantly became deep and murderous. He said in a deep voice, "Since you want to die, don't blame me. I will only attack once. After that, regardless of whether you live or die, I will not attack again." As soon as he finished speaking, a black longsword appeared in his hand. A layer of dark aura permeated the sword's body. Streaks of black light continuously surged like small black snakes. It was extremely strange. "I'll kill you with one sword." Yi Chunli raised the black sword in his hand slightly. After he spoke in a cold manner, he slashed down without any hesitation. His movements were simple and unadorned, but the sword will around him was terrifying. A black sword shadow appeared in the void, like a black waterfall, suddenly falling down, blasting towards Nie Tian. What a strong sword will! Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. At this critical moment, he forcefully released the power of the divine demon. The blood and qi around him surged continuously, and the sword was stimulated by the blood and qi, exploding with an extremely violent aura. Sky-devouring blood. With a low roar, Nie Tian slashed down with his sword. The blood-colored sword will condensed into a 10,000-meter-long blood-colored sword shadow. The sword shadow was surging with intense flames, and its aura was extremely violent. What a powerful duo! When everyone saw the scene in the sky, their expressions became sluggish. Even though they were standing nearly 100,000 meters away, they could still clearly feel the violent and sharp sword intent. Who would have thought that this battle would be so exciting? What shocked them even more was that Nie Tian was really too tenacious. First, he killed Yi Chenxiang. Then he severely injured Yi Chenfeng. Now, he was going against Yi Chunli. It was as if there was endless power in Nie Tian's body. It was hard to imagine that a person could be so tenacious. Boom! Boom! High up in the sky, the dark sword shadow and the blood-colored sword shadow were like two terrifying giant dragons. They approached each other rapidly and were about to collide. Boom! In the next moment, the two sword shadows collided with a loud bang. A terrifying roar sounded, and the space actually stagnated, as if it had stopped in an instant. Whoosh! Immediately, a powerful sword wave that could be seen with the naked eye appeared. It surged from the center of the collision and spread in all directions. The surrounding space was impacted by the sword wave, and the air actually appeared to be in a dense state, as if it was about to burn. Chi, chi, chi. Immediately after, ear-piercing sounds came from high up in the sky. The two sword shadows clashed with each other like wild beasts, wanting to tear each other into pieces. Bang! However, in the next moment, the blood-colored sword shadow could not withstand it and directly collapsed. Endless blood-colored sword will raged and attacked the space. Even though Nie Tian ignited his blood and qi and erupted with a powerful sword, he was still no match for Yi Chunli's sword. Buzz! In the next moment, the dark sword shadow in the sky actually let out a strange sword cry, and then it set off a dark storm. Like a giant dragon, it forcefully pressed towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian suddenly felt his chest sink, and he reacted instantly. The wings on his back shook violently, and his figure retreated for thousands of meters. At this moment, he almost used all the star power in his body. When the star soul wings spread out, they were thousands of meters long. His speed was extremely fast, but compared to the roaring sword shadow, he was still slightly slower. Bang! With a muffled sound, Nie Tian's figure was actually hit by the dark sword shadow, and he flew straight out. Like a kite with a broken string, he fell straight to the ground. Under the gaze of countless people, Nietion's figure drew a blood-colored trajectory in the air, and the next moment, he directly smashed onto a giant rock on the ground. Bang! The giant rock directly collapsed and turned into stone powder that flew everywhere. On the ground, a giant pit with a radius of tens of meters appeared. A blood-colored figure lay in the giant pit. It was Nietion. Dead, he's dead. The crowd's eyes trembled, and they stared at the blood-colored figure in the giant pit. They could no longer feel the latter's aura, and they couldn't help but gasp. Nietion brought them too much shock, but facing an opponent who was far stronger than him, he still couldn't turn the tide and was killed in the end. Is he really dead? In midair, a pair of beautiful eyes that kept flickering stared at Nietion. Her eyes were filled with ecstasy, but it seemed that she didn't believe it at all. She couldn't wait to land on the ground and check for herself. Nietion, I admit that you are a swordsman worthy of respect. Yichunli looked at Nietion coldly, and he said indifferently, but unfortunately, your opponent is me. To be able to die under my drifting abyss is your honor. His calm voice was filled with insufferably arrogant arrogance. As one of the 9 sky prides, Yichunli indeed had the right to be arrogant. The black longsword in his hand was a sword of primordial spirit, drifting abyss. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that among the young martial artists in the entire abandoned land, there were very few people who could make Yichunli use drifting abyss. Drifting abyss is indeed terrifying. However, in the instant Yichunli's voice landed, a weak voice rang out from the ground. Chapter 22:20. A weak voice sounded in Yichunli's ears. However, it was like a thunderclap that exploded in Yichunli's ears. It actually caused his calm face to reveal an expression of surprise. Yichunli's eyes trembled as he looked at the bloody figure in disbelief. He simply could not believe his eyes. Nietion actually did not die. Nietion stood up again. How is this possible? Yichunli's eyes suddenly shrank as he exclaimed in his heart. He was extremely shocked. He clearly sensed that Nietion was no longer breathing. How could the latter still stand up again? Moreover, the sword just now was extremely powerful. Even a mountain range would be destroyed directly. The sword's shadow landed directly on Nietion's flesh and blood body. The latter actually did not die. This was too terrifying. How strong was Nietion's martial physique? Was it still a flesh and blood body? Everyone present was shocked, and their eyes trembled. The scene fell into a dead silence of disbelief. Nietion's figure stood in the giant pit. His body was covered in blood, and his breath was extremely weak. However, his eyes were still extremely bright, like stars. The sword just now dealt a great blow to him. At this moment, the 9 vital meridians in Nietion's body had already been torn apart. Even his fiend god embryo had been attacked. However, at the last moment, the princess's tear activated the princess's protection, which saved Nietion's life. Cher, your princess's tear saved my life again. Nietion laughed bitterly in his heart. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. There was not a trace of fear on his face. Oh my God, he's still alive. At this moment, the crowd finally reacted and shouted in shock. They looked at Nietion with fear, as if they had seen a ghost. Who would have thought that Nietion would actually be alive after being hit by the dark sword shadow? This was too terrifying. Nietion's martial physique was so abnormal that it made people's hair stand on end. How could you still be alive? At this moment, Yichunli spoke coldly. His eyes were surging with killing intent. Looks like you're very surprised. Nietion smiled faintly and said with ridicule, I remember that you said earlier that you'll only attack once, and after that, no matter if I'm dead or alive, you won't attack again, right? Yichunli's gaze suddenly tightened, and an embarrassed expression surfaced on his face. Before he attacked, he had indeed said that he would only attack once. After that, regardless of whether Nietion lived or died, he would not attack again. These words were said very arrogantly, but this was because Yichunli had full confidence in his sword. Before he attacked, He had already noticed that Nye Tion's aura was unstable and his blood was restless. Therefore, he was absolutely certain that the latter would not be able to block his sword. But the fact was that Nye Tion actually withstood his sword. It could only be said that Yi Chunli was overly confident. Nye Tion's terror was beyond his imagination. He even felt that if Nye Tion was in peak condition before he fought with him, the outcome of this battle might not be certain. Before Nye Tion fought with Yi Chunli, he had already killed Yi Chinxiang and severely injured Yi Chenfeng. At that time, his condition was already very weak. But what Yi Chunli did not know was that Nye Tion's most terrifying trump card had not been revealed yet. Nye Tion's strongest trump card was not the God Fiend Sword Intent, but the 9 Extreme Chaos Beast. But he remembered Fat Cat's words. Even at the moment of life and death, he would not use the 9 Extreme Chaos Beast. Therefore, even when facing an opponent like Yi Chunli, Nye Tion did not use the 9 Extreme Chaos Beast. Fortunately, he blocked Yi Chunli's sword and won a chance of survival for himself. You won't go back on your words, right? Nye Tion looked at Yi Chunli. The latter's eyes were filled with killing intent that was even stronger than before. Of course, I, Yi Chunli, am a man of my words. Yi Chunli laughed coldly and suddenly turned to look at Yi Chenfeng on the other side. He said solemnly, "Old Five, go and kill him." Huh? Yi Chenfeng was stunned. He looked at Yi Chunli and could not react for a moment. "I asked you to kill him," Yi Chunli said coldly. His eyes were cold. Yi Chenfeng felt the sharp killing intent in Yi Chunli's eyes, and his body could not help but tremble. He actually took a few steps back subconsciously. He did not expect that Yi Chunli would actually ask him to kill Nye Tion. Impressive. Seeing this scene, Nye Tion could not help but laugh coldly. He said solemnly, "You, Yi Chunli, are indeed a man of your words. You can't make a move, but you actually let your brother do it. What a good move." Yi Chunli was not only cold and ruthless, but also very shameless. He did not make a move now, but let Yi Chenfeng do it. What was the difference between this and him making a move himself? No matter what you say, you're dead today. Yi Chunli smiled cold. He did not take Nye Tion's mockery to heart. It was because he saw how strong Nye Tion was that he was even more determined to kill Nye Tion. He felt a threat from Nye Tion, so he must kill Nye Tion. "Big brother." At this time, Yi Chenfeng reacted. He actually had an embarrassed expression. He looked at Nye Tion with some fear in his eyes. "Huh? You're afraid of him?" Yi Chunli saw Yi Chenfeng's appearance, and his face could not help but darken. He asked cold. Yi Chenfeng swallowed his saliva and nodded. He was indeed very afraid of Nye Tion. Even though the current Nye Tion was already in an extremely weak state, he still did not dare to make a move. Previously, Nye Tion's sword almost took his life. That scene was still lingering in his mind, and he could not get it out of his mind. In his mind, Nye Tion was simply a monster. Although Nye Tion looked like he had no strength to fight back, who knew if this monster was really in disguise? Therefore, Yi Chenfeng really did not dare to make a move on Nye Tion. Trash! Yi Chunli saw Yi Chenfeng's cowardly appearance and growled. Then, he locked his gaze on Yin Xianyue. "Your Highness, I'll kill him." Yin Xianyue stepped forward and said flatteringly, without waiting for Yi Chunli to speak. She had always been worried that the Dead Knight Empire might vent their anger on her because of Yi Chinxiang's death. Although she did not kill Yi Chinxiang, the latter came here because of her. Now, it was a very good opportunity to kill Nye Tion for Yi Chunli, and she could curry favor with the Dead Knight Crown Prince. More importantly, Yin Xianyue had been waiting for a chance to kill Nye Tion with her own hands. If Nye Tion died in the hands of someone else, she would be very happy. But if she could kill Nye Tion with her own hands, she would be even happier. At this moment, Nye Tion had already lost the ability to resist and was completely a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. It was a good opportunity for her to make a move. "Nye Tion, I've been waiting for this moment." Then, Yin Xianyue's figure moved, and she quickly approached Nye Tion. Her eyes were surging with a burning desire for revenge. "Yin Xianyue, I said that you will never have the chance to kill me." Nietian looked at Xianyue and said indifferently, "This sentence is still valid." Chapter 22-21. Xianyue noticed the strange look on Nietian's face and could not help but frown. "You're just bluffing." But the next moment, she made up her mind, and with a roar, her figure moved and directly struck out with her palm. A terrifying palm shadow appeared, pressing straight towards Nietian. Xianyue used all her strength in this palm strike, determined to kill Nietian. At this time, Nietian's aura was very weak, and he had no power to resist at all. But his expression was very indifferent, without the slightest fear, but a playful look on his face. He even looked at Xianyue with a sympathetic gaze. It was as if the one who was going to die next was not him, but Xianyue. Boom! The palm shadow in the air rolled like a dragon, falling straight down like a mountain, smashing towards Nietian. The eyes of the crowd trembled, as if they could already see the scene of Nietian being killed. But at this critical moment, a sudden change occurred. Buzz! High in the sky, a strange sound rang, and immediately a huge vortex appeared in the air. The space suddenly trembled and was instantly pulled taut. The next moment, a strange scene happened. The palm shadow in the air was swallowed by the vortex and disappeared. What's going on? The sudden scene made Xianyue's beautiful eyes tremble, her face dull, completely unaware of what was going on. And in the sky, Chun Li's eyes also narrowed, a strange look on his face. What's going on? Am I seeing things? The reaction of the crowd was even more horrified. One by one, they exclaimed loudly, puzzled. Xianyue's palm was about to kill Nietian, but it was swallowed by a vortex that suddenly appeared. Such a scene was too strange. Xianyue, I told you, you won't have the chance to kill me. Nietian looked at Xianyue and smiled faintly, with a playful look on his face. Impossible. This princess must kill you with my own hands today. Xianyue was infuriated by Nietian's words. With a fierce roar, his aura surged crazily as he slammed his palms down simultaneously. Two palm shadows swept out like raging dragons. You're courting death. At that moment, a deep roar rang out from the void. Immediately after, a huge hand stretched out from the huge vortex in the sky and easily blocked the two palm shadows. Then, it covered Xianyue. No! Xianyue suddenly felt a mighty force coming from all directions, and in his panic, he couldn't help but scream. Bang! In the next moment, a muffled sound was heard, and Xianyue's figure was directly sent flying backward. He was blasted 10,000 meters away and smashed into the ground, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Seeing this, the onlookers all gasped in astonishment. From beginning to end, no one appeared in the void, but Xianyue was inexplicably sent flying. Who has it come out? At this moment, Li finally couldn't bear it anymore and roared in a deep voice. In his hand, the Li Yuan dark sword once again appeared, and he directly blasted it out. A sharp and murderous dark sword shadow whizzed out and blasted straight toward the strange vortex in the sky. At this moment, the strange vortex spun wildly and instantly turned into a terrible storm, like a giant dragon, soaring into the sky. Boom! Immediately, the two forces collided, and a loud roar sounded in the air. The terrible power raged, and the whole world seemed to be torn apart. Boom! 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 Waves of terrifying airwaves spread out, forcing the crowd to retreat. The earth was directly torn apart, and the sand and stones were directly crushed, turning into turbid waves, rolling in the air. Just as Nietian's figure was about to be submerged by the shock wave, a figure suddenly appeared, took him away, and rushed into the sky. Long time no see. Nietian steadied himself, looked at the familiar face next to him, and called out a name with a faint smile. And I, jamming. That's right, the person who appeared at this moment was none other than Sacred Lord Mysterious Dragon, and I, jamming. Seeing how calm you are, you must have noticed my existence long ago. And I, jamming, also smiled, and at the same time, placed his palm on Nietion's back and released a stream of power into the latter's body. Nietion felt an endless stream of vigorous power flowing into his body. It was very gentle and instantly healed his injured dragon meridians to a large extent. Many thanks, Nietion smiled and swept away the blood stains on his body, and his pale face slightly recovered. He swept his divine sense over Ni jamming and was quite surprised. At this moment, Ni jamming's strength was actually in the late paramount god stage. He still remembered that when he and Ni jamming separated, the latter was far from this strong. However, Ni jamming was a reincarnated person, and as long as his memories continued to awaken, his strength would continue to recover, and he would continue to grow stronger. Therefore, it was much easier for him to improve his strength compared to others. Ni jamming was indeed worthy of being sacred Lord Mysterious Dragon. Although they were both in the late paramount god stage, his strength completely crushed En Jianwei. Even when facing En Chinli head-on, he was not at a disadvantage at all. In fact, Nietion had long noticed Ni jamming's existence, and the latter had already arrived before En Chinli made a move. However, the strange thing was that Ni jamming did not immediately appear, but waited until the moment when Nietion was about to die, and finally made a move. Ni jamming, you could have made a move earlier. Why did you wait until now? Nietion smiled bitterly and said, "Aren't you afraid that I will die in En Chinli's hands?" Ni jamming's lips curled into a faint smile, and with a face full of confidence, he said, "You are the person chosen by that lord. You won't die so easily." That lord? Nietion was stunned for a moment and asked with a puzzled face, "What do you mean? Heaven's secrets cannot be revealed." Ni jamming smiled strangely and did not answer Nietion. Nietion's brows furrowed, and he knew that Ni jamming would not say much, so he did not continue to ask. Since Ni jamming's strength had recovered to the late-stage paramount god, it also meant that his memory had more or less been awakened, and he must have known something. After all, he was a person who had reincarnated countless times, and no one knew what he had experienced in the past. Nietion was very puzzled. Ni jamming said that he was the person chosen by that lord. What did that mean? Who was that lord? Could it be that mysterious man? Nietion frowned and guessed in his heart. Could it be that Ni jamming knows that mysterious man? Nietion, there are some things that you will naturally know when the time is right. The most important thing for you now is to improve your strength, and you don't need to think about anything else. Ni jamming glanced at Nietion and said with a slight nod. Nietion looked at Ni jamming and felt a little strange. Such words were usually said by the mouth of an elder, and it was more appropriate. However, Ni jamming looked younger than Nietion. Because of this, Nietion sometimes almost forgot that Ni jamming was an old monster who had lived for more than 600,000 years. However, Ni jamming's appearance made him very happy and also very relieved. Chapter 22:22. What's going on? Who is that guy? How can he be so strong? Ni jamming's sudden appearance caused a commotion among the crowd. This battle was full of twists and turns. It was beyond everyone's expectations. Everyone's eyes were filled with doubt, but they were filled with passion. They were looking forward to the battle between En Chinli and Ni jamming. Nietion, take a rest first. Leave the rest to me. Ni jamming smiled faintly and gestured for Nietion to step back. Nietion nodded slightly. He was very weak at the moment and urgently needed rest to recover. Who are you? At this moment, Yi Chinli spoke. Cold eyes stared at Ni jamming as he growled in a low voice. I am Nietion's friend. Ni jamming smiled faintly and said, "You are the crown prince of the Dead Knight Empire, after all. How can the words of the crown prince sound like a fart? Don't you feel ashamed?" His calm voice was filled with mockery. "This has nothing to do with you." Yi Chinli's face was cold as he said, "Let me give you a piece of advice. Don't get involved in this, because you can't afford to." Is that so? Ni jamming's lips curled into a provocative arc. He said indifferently, "What if I insist on getting involved? Then you'll be the enemy of the Dead Knight empire. Yi Chunli roared in anger. The aura of his body was gradually becoming stronger. The dark sword aura surged into space, and the sky became much darker. It's just the Dead Knight Empire. Do you think I'm afraid? Jamming sneered and took a step forward. The aura around him surged like a stormy sea, forming a terrifying whirlpool in the air. Looking down on the Dead Knight Empire, you are courting death. Yi Chunli was completely enraged. He let out a violent roar and moved. Li Yuan slashed down ferociously. Boom! In an instant, the sword will condensed and a dark sword shadow appeared. It was like a wild beast from hell, and it fell straight at Jamming. In the void, dark clouds surged and the sky changed color. The space let out a low sound as though it was wailing. When the crowd felt the aura of Yi Chunli's sword, their expressions instantly changed, and they were extremely terrified. Jamming wasn't nervous in the slightest when facing Yi Chunli's terrifying sword. Instead, he laughed, and then his figure moved. The enormous vortex outside his body whistled out and enveloped the sword image. Just as the sword shadow and the vortex collided, a strange scene occurred. That huge vortex actually swallowed the dark sword shadow directly. The 10,000-meter-long dark sword was devoured, as if it had vanished into thin air. How is this possible? Yi Chunli was stunned by the scene in front of him. He could no longer keep his composure and cried out strangely. Jamming smiled, but his figure suddenly retreated. He came to Nie Tian's side and said, Nie Tian, let's go. After saying that, the two figures moved together and directly rushed toward a cave behind them. The figures of the two were very fast. Before anyone could react, they had already disappeared from the cave. Big brother, this is bad. After a few seconds, the fifth prince of the Dead Knight Empire, Yi Chunfeng, suddenly reacted. He looked at Yi Chunli and cried out strangely. What's wrong? Yi Chunli's eyes focused, and he asked in astonishment. Yi Chunfeng pointed to a cave and said with a horrified expression, They entered that cave. Yi Chunli's face darkened, and he immediately understood. Nie Tian and Jamming entered the fifth level's cave number 99. This cave was the cave that hid the Nine Hearts Demon Lotus. Big brother, let's go in quickly. If they discover the secret of the Nine Hearts Demon Lotus, then it'll be terrible. Yi Chunfeng had a horrified expression as he transmitted his voice to Yi Chunli. No way. Yi Chunli reached out to stop Yi Chunfeng and said, If we go in now, it's no different from sending ourselves to death. Yi Chunfeng was stunned for a moment, and then he reacted and said, Yes, they must be waiting for us at the cave entrance. As long as we enter, they'll attack instantly and catch us unprepared. Yi Chunli nodded. This was exactly what he was worried about. He reckoned that Jamming's strength was not beneath his. If it was a head-on battle, he still had some confidence. But if he was ambushed by Jamming, he would be in great danger. More importantly, the strength that Jamming had displayed was too strange. Anyone who saw that kind of means would be fearful. Hence, at this time, Yi Chunli did not dare to enter the cave at all. Big brother, then what should we do? Yi Chunfeng's eyes flickered, and he was very nervous. The fifth level's cave number 99 was the Yi clan's greatest secret. Once it was discovered by others, it would be terrible. You go back and inform the people in the clan. I'll wait here. As long as they dare to come out, I'll definitely kill them personally. Yi Chunli said to Yi Chunfeng coldly. Because the matter this time was special, there were no experts following by his side. But the development of the matter exceeded Yi Chunli's expectations. He did not know what to do now, either, and could only ask the upper echelons of the clan to step forward. All right. Yi Chunfeng nodded heavily, and then turned to leave. The crowd watched in a daze. They did not expect that this great battle would actually end in such a manner. But Yi Chunli's expression at this moment was incomparably sinister. To him, this battle had not ended. It was just the beginning. At the same time, in the cave. Which cave is this? Nie Tian looked at the surrounding stone walls and asked in a daze. The speed at which he entered just now was too fast, and he did not have the time to see clearly which cave it was. The fifth level, cave number 99. And I, jamming, laughed and said, "Isn't this the cave that you wanted to enter? You also know about this?" Nyetian was stunned. It seemed that Ni jamming had arrived long ago, but he only sensed the latter's existence later. Ni jamming nodded and smiled. Then his face stiffened, and his expression instantly became solemn. He said, "Nyetian, I'm sorry. I didn't take good care of Roa. I lost her." Nyetian saw Ni jamming's self-reproach and laughed. He said, "Don't worry, I've already found Roa. She's with my friend now, and she's very safe." "You found Ro?" Ni jamming's pupil shrank when he heard Nyetian's words. He took a step forward, grabbed Nyetian's shoulders excitedly, and shouted, "Where is she now?" Seeing Ni jamming so nervous, Nyetian could not help but smile. He said, "Didn't I say that she's very safe now? Don't worry." Ni jamming looked at Nyetian and confirmed that the latter was not teasing him. He then let out a long sigh of relief. The big stone that had been hanging in his heart was finally lifted. He had been worried about Nyeyuro's safety. If something really happened to the latter, he would feel guilty for the rest of his life. Now that he knew that Nyeyuro was safe, he was finally relieved. Then, Nyetian briefly told him about his encounter with Nyeyuro and Xiaoguai. After listening to Nyetian, Ni jamming was completely relieved. When he knew that Nyeyuro had been captured by In Xianyue and became his martial slave, his eyes trembled. He regretted not killing In Xianyue just now. Chapter 22-23. In the cave, when Ni jamming heard Nyetian ask about Dishi, he couldn't help but raise the corner of his mouth, revealing a strange smile. "What's wrong?" Nyetian saw Ni jamming's strange expression and couldn't help but frown. "Nyetian, you don't have to worry about Lord Dishi. He is in the Burial Cloud Mountain range and is currently doing something important. He can't show himself for the time being." Ni jamming smiled and said mysteriously. Nyetian was speechless. Since Ni jamming didn't want to say more, he didn't ask. He was relieved to know that Dishi was fine. Ni jamming, why didn't you kill Yi Chenli just now? Nyetian asked. Ni jamming smiled bitterly and shook his head. "Do you think I didn't want to? I may not be a match for Yi Chenli with my current strength." "That's impossible." Nyetian frowned. He clearly saw that Ni jamming received 2 sword strikes from Yi Chenli with ease. He thought that Ni jamming's current strength was enough to crush Yi Chenli. Yi Chenli is the crown prince of the Dead Knight Empire. His talent in martial arts is definitely at the peak level in the Abandoned Land. Ni jamming smiled and said, "My current strength has just recovered to the late stage of Paramount God. Perhaps in your eyes, it was very easy for me to receive 2 sword strikes from Yi Chenli. But you don't know that I've been injured by him. You will understand if you feel my Yuan meridians now." Nyetian was stunned when he heard Ni jamming's words. He then used his divine sense to feel Ni jamming's Yuan meridians. As expected, there were cracks on Ni jamming's Yuan meridians. So Yi Chenli is so strong. Seeing Ni jamming's injuries, Nyetian couldn't help but exclaim, "Of course." Ni jamming shook his head and smiled bitterly. "But your means are very strange. I guess Yi Chenli is afraid, so he doesn't dare to rush into the cave." Nyetian looked at Ni jamming and smiled faintly. Ni jamming nodded and suddenly asked, "Nyetian, how do you know about the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus?" "I have a friend who told me." Ni jamming smiled faintly and said, 9 Hearts Demon Lotus. 1 lotus has 9 hearts, and 9 hearts become 1. Legend has it that it is a rare flower that can absorb the power of heaven and earth and fuse it into one. It is rumored that this is a strange flower of the heavens and earth. It can absorb the energy of the 9 elements of the world and fuse them into one. When a martial artist absorbs the power of the 9 Hearts Demonic Lotus, not only can they increase their strength, but they can also increase their martial arts talent. But I've only heard of it. I've never seen it before. I never expected that the 9 Hearts Demonic Lotus would actually be in the 1,000 Demons Cave. Nyetian nodded, but he couldn't help but feel surprised. Jamming nodding, Ni jamming smiled. She, Jitian, Nyetian, you seem one of the 9 hearts demon lotus very much. And I jamming looked at Nyetian and said with a faint smile, You seem one of the 9 hearts demon lotus, Nyetian. And I jamming looked at Nyetian and smiled faintly. Who would have thought that one of the guardian families, the Lin family, would actually produce a 9 elements unite martial artist? After hearing what Nyetian said, Enai Jamming's eyes couldn't help but tremble. He said excitedly, Nyetian, can I see Linchen? Enai Jamming was excited after hearing Nyetian. Nyetian, can I see Linchen? Linchen is from the guardian families. Nyetian thought to himself. He was surprised to hear it from Enai Jamming. Linchen is with me. I have an internal small world called the 9 Superbs. He is in there. Nyetian nodded and said worriedly, There is a strong prohibition in this cave. If Lin Shun comes out, he might not be able to withstand it. Enai Jamming laughed and said, Nyetan, you underestimate the talent of a 9 energies as one martial artist. It is no exaggeration to say that a 9 energies as one martial artist can at least enter the 7th level of the 1,000 Demons Cave. The 7th level of the cave. Nyetian was stunned for a moment. He then smiled and said, You must be joking. I heard from others that no one has ever entered the 7th level of the cave. That is because the 9 energies as one martial artist has not come out. Enai Jamming laughed and said confidently, Don't worry. Let Lin Shin come out. He will be fine. Nyetian nodded and secretly asked Fat Cat. The latter also nodded. He then took out the 9 Superbs and let Lin Shin out. Brother Nyetian, who is he? Lin Shin came out and suddenly saw a stranger. He could not help but feel afraid and instinctively retreated to Nyetian's side. Lin Shun, he is my friend. Nyetian smiled faintly and touched Lin Chen's little head. Enai Jamming looked at Lin Shun and sized him up. He could not help but nod and said, He is indeed a 9 energies as one martial artist. In the next moment, he immediately reacted and said in surprise, Nyetian, you want to use the 9 hearts demon lotus to help Lin Shun activate the 9 energies divine seal, right? Yes. Nyetian was stunned at first, then he nodded. He did not expect that Enai Jamming not only knew about the 9 energies as one, but also the 9 energies divine seal. Only an old demon would have such knowledge. All right, then let's go find the 9 hearts demon lotus now. Enai Jamming nodded and smiled. He could not help but pinch Lin Chen's little face. He was very happy. Nyetian looked at Enai Jamming. It seemed that the latter did not know that the guardian family had betrayed him. After thinking for a while, Nyetian decided to tell Enai Jamming about the guardian family later. Then, the 3 of them carefully walked into the cave. Enai Jamming walked to the front, Lin Shun was in the middle, and Nyetian was at the back. A 9 energies as one martial artist is indeed talented. Lin Shun is actually fine in this cave. Nyetian looked at Lin Shun and thought to himself. After a while, the 3 of them came to the end of the cave and entered a rock cave. The moment they entered the rock cave, the scene that appeared in front of them completely shocked them. This was an empty rock cave. In the rock cave, there was a small lake with a radius of about 1,000 meters. The surface of the lake was completely covered by a strange flower. Looking closely, the flower petals were constantly changing colors. One moment, they were crimson like fire, the next moment, they were golden like wheat, and the next moment, they were emerald like leaves. The color of the light in the entire rock cave was constantly changing, and it looked magnificent. This is... Nyetian looked at the scene in front of him, and his eyes trembled slightly. He was so surprised that he could not speak. 9 hearts demon lotus. Enai Jamming swallowed his saliva and said with a dull face. Lin Chen's little face was stiff. His mouth was wide open, but he could not make a sound. It really is the 9 hearts demon lotus. At the same time, Fat Cat's excited voice sounded. Each flower had 9 petals. It was the 9 flames demon lotus. In the center of the petals, there was a flower that was as clear as snow. It was the heart of the demon lotus. Without a doubt, these flowers above the rock cave lake were the 9 hearts demon lotus. Nyetian knew that there were 9 hearts demon lotuses in this cave, but he did not expect there to be so many. Roughly estimating, There were at least thousands of nine hearts demon lotuses. The value of thousands of nine hearts demon lotuses was immeasurable. Fat, how many nine hearts demon lotuses do I need to activate Lin Chen's 9 energy seal and let my strength advance to the supreme realm? After a while, Niet Tian became cold and suddenly asked, One is enough. Fat Cat answered with a smile. Then is 1 nine hearts demon lotus enough for us? Niet Tian's eyes were slightly hot as he continued to ask. Chapter 22-24. Take them all. Niet Tian was stunned when he heard Fat Cat's laughter. Opening the 9 primordial divine seal for Lin Shun and advancing to the paramount god realm for Niet Tian only needed 1 nine hearts bewitching lotus. But there were thousands of nine hearts bewitching lotuses in front of them. Niet Tian had thought that 1 nine hearts bewitching lotus would be enough. But the little fat cat actually wanted to take away all of the 9 hearts demonic lotuses. This caused him to be completely stunned. After staring blankly for a dozen seconds, Niet Tian finally snapped out his daze and asked, his lips slightly dry, Little fatty, are we really going to take all of the 9 hearts demon lotuses with us? Of course. Fat Cat laughed and said proudly, Have you forgotten? You have the 9 extremities. We can put this lake of demonic lotuses into the 9 extremities. Niet Tian's gaze suddenly flickered, and his eyes became incomparably blazing. He was so excited that he forgot that he had the 9 extremities. He was just worried about how to take away thousands of 9 hearts bewitching lotuses. The 9 hearts bewitching lotus was a rare treasure. It couldn't be kept in a space ring, which would greatly reduce its efficacy. It was a waste, but it was different with the 9 extremities. Niet Tian could put the lake in front of him directly into the 9 extremities. In this way, thousands of 9 hearts bewitching lotuses would be perfectly moved and wouldn't be affected at all. It would just be a change of living environment. He believed that with the vitality of a 9 hearts bewitching lotus, it would definitely be able to adapt to the 9 extremities. Thinking of this, Niet Tian couldn't help but smile. He couldn't hide the huge surprise in his heart. There were thousands of 9 hearts bewitching lotuses. He was really rich this time. Niet Tian, what are you thinking about? N.I. Jiaming didn't know the conversation between Niet Tian and Fat Cat. He couldn't help but ask when he saw the latter's strange expression. N.I. Jiaming, I want to take all of these 9 hearts bewitching lotuses. Niet Tian's eyes trembled slightly. You, N.I. Jiaming was stunned for a moment, and his face stiffened for a moment, as if he was doubting his own ears. He said in astonishment, What did you say? I said, I will take all of these 9 hearts demonic lotuses with me. Niet Tian repeated as he took out the 9 extremities and said, I'm going to place this lake of the bewitching lotus into the 9 extremities. N.I. Jiaming's eyes suddenly trembled, and he immediately reacted. His divine senses swept over the 9 extremities, and he looked extremely terrified. Previously, he had only heard Niet Tian mention casually that there was an item beside him that had a world of its own, and it was called the 9 extremities. However, he had never expected that the 9 superbs mentioned by Niet Tian was actually a real world. Niet Tian, where did you get the 9 superbs in your hands? N.I. Jiaming was stunned for a long time before he asked with a frown. I created it myself. Niet Tian smiled faintly. He then activated the holographic divine rune and carefully sensed the demonic lotus lake in front of him. N.I. Jiaming was stunned again. His mouth was wide open, and he could not make a sound for a long time. However, Niet Tian did not care about him, and focused on sensing the situation of the demonic lotus lake. He first had to determine how big the lake was, whether there were any restrictions around it, and whether there were other things under the lake. After a while, Niet Tian confirmed that there was nothing strange about the lake, and he said with a faint smile, Very well, there's nothing strange about this lake. I can directly dig the lake out from the cave. Niet Tian, you want to dig the lake out? N.I. Jiaming was stunned for a while, and his eyes trembled as he asked, Why can't I? Niet Tian laughed and said faintly, But before that, I need to recover my strength. The demonic lotus lake was only about 1,000 meters in circumference. For Niet Tian, It was not difficult to dig the entire lake out. However, his current state was very weak, and he needed to recover his strength before he could do it. Actually, Ni jamming could do it on his behalf. However, Nietian knew that Ni jamming was also injured. The Nine Hearts demonic lotus was extremely precious, and to prevent any accidents, Nietian decided to do it himself. After all, he had the holographic divine pattern, and he could sense all the movements in the surrounding space at any time. This was something that even Ni jamming could not do. Next, Nietian sat cross-legged and began to slowly recover his strength. Ni jamming and Lin Chen watched from the side and did not disturb him. After half a day, Nietian stood up again, and his entire body's aura had mostly recovered. Originally, his 9 dragon veins were the most heavily injured, and after he received treatment from Ni jamming, his dragon veins recovered slightly. At this moment, with his insane recovery ability, he recovered very quickly. We can start. Nietian looked at the lake in front of him with a burning gaze, and the corners of his mouth curled into a confident smile. Although his state had not returned to normal, he was very confident that he could easily dig the entire demonic lotus lake in front of him. Nietian waved his hand and let Ni jamming and Lin Chen leave the cave. He took a deep breath, and his body began to slowly release the power of the stars. The endless power of the stars, like falling starlight, instantly enveloped the entire lake. With a thought, Nietian controlled the power of the stars and seeped it into the ground where the lake was. He activated the holographic divine pattern and was very careful to sense the distribution of the power of the stars. All right. After a long time, Nietian felt that the power of the stars had been evenly distributed under the ground and enveloped the entire lake. He smiled and murmured, "Rise." Boom! The moment he said that, the ground of the cave shook violently, and suddenly, the entire lake was lifted. Ni jamming and Lin Chen saw this, and their nerves were stretched taut, and they did not dare to breathe. Slowly, the entire demonic lotus lake was lifted, and it slowly became suspended in the air. This was the most crucial moment. The power of the stars had to be very evenly distributed, or the soil under the lake would loosen, and by then, the entire lake might collapse. Nietian carefully controlled the entire lake and did not dare to blink. Then, he took out the 9 extremities, and with a slight thought, the light of time and space was released. He controlled the demonic lotus lake and sent it directly into the 9 extremities. Then, he also entered the 9 extremities. The demonic lotus lake was still in a complete state. Nietian found a suitable valley and let the entire lake slowly descend, bit by bit, close to the soil. Phew, it's a success. When the entire lake landed safely in the valley, Nietian let out a long breath, and his tense face relaxed. At this moment, on his forehead, there were dense beads of sweat. Thousands of 9 hearts demonic lotuses were too precious. If they were destroyed, Nietian's intestines would turn green with regret. Seeing that the demonic lotus lake was safely transferred into the 9 extremities, Nietian's heart was filled with indescribable joy. With so many 9 hearts demonic lotuses, not only could Nietian use them himself, but he could also give them to the people around him. These 9 hearts demonic lotuses originally belonged to the Yi clan. When Yi Chunli and the others entered the cave and found that there was only a bare cave left for them, what kind of expression would they have? Chapter 22-25. Nietian walked out of the 9 superbs. He was relaxed and in high spirits. Nietian, did you put the demonic lotus lake in the 9 superbs? Ni jamming asked in surprise when he saw Nietian's expression. Nietian nodded and looked at the deep pit in the cave. He smiled and said, "This pit is not bad. Take it as a surprise for the Yi clan." Ni jamming was stunned for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "If the Yi clan knew that you took away the entire demonic lotus lake, I wonder how they would feel. I almost died in the hands of Yi Chunli. It's not too much to ask the Yi clan to pay a little as compensation." Nietian smiled faintly and stepped out of the cave, ready to leave. Jamming was speechless. The Yi clan's payment was a little too much. Jamming, how we get out of here? Tian walked out of the cave, but he was very worried and said, Yi Chunli must be waiting outside. The powerhouses of the Yi clan might be here too. If we go out now, I'm afraid it will be very dangerous. Jamming looked at Tian and suddenly smiled strangely. He said, Who said we were going out? Tian frowned and said, If we don't go out, it's not a long-term solution to stay here. This cave was too important to the Yi clan. If the powerhouses of the Yi clan arrived and blocked Tian and the others in the cave, it would be really troublesome. At this time, Jamming smiled strangely. Then he moved and entered the cave again. Tian did not know what Jamming was up to. He followed him into the cave with a puzzled look. Then, Jamming formed a strange seal with his hands and probed the stone walls around the cave bit by bit, as if he was looking for something. Jamming, what are you doing? Tian could not understand and could not help but ask. I'm looking for a passage that leads to another cave. Jamming replied, but did not say much. Tian's eyes narrowed. He did not know that there was a passage to another cave hidden in the cave. He was not in a hurry and quietly watched from the side. Jamming was very patient. He used the hand seals in his hands to test the rock walls of the cave inch by inch. Found it. After half an hour, Jamming suddenly cried out in surprise. He pointed at a stone wall that was as smooth as a mirror and said, It's here. Tian and Lin Chen walked forward, confused. The stone wall in front of them was very smooth, and there was nothing on it. Even when Tian activated the holographic divine rune, he couldn't sense anything. Jamming, are you sure there's a passageway here? Tian looked at the excited Jamming and asked in astonishment. Of course. Jamming smiled confidently. Then, the seal in his hand suddenly released a ray of light that landed on the stone wall. In the next moment, a strange scene occurred. Boom! The stone wall shook violently, and immediately after, a crack appeared on it. Then, the crack gradually widened. In the end, it became a narrow passage about 2 meters high and half a meter wide. There's really a passageway. Tian was shocked by the scene in front of him, and he let out a strange cry. However, this passageway was hidden too deeply, and he couldn't sense it at all. There's a hidden passageway in every cave in the Thousand Demons Cave. Jamming smiled faintly and explained, This hidden passageway leads to the next layer of cave. We're now in the 5th layer of cave, so this passageway leads to the 6th layer of cave. Tian's face suddenly changed, and he was so shocked that he couldn't speak. If every cave had a hidden passageway that led to the next layer of cave, didn't that mean that even if one entered the 1st layer of cave, one can enter the next layer one layer at a time, all the way to the 9th layer of cave? And this way of entering was not hindered by the restriction at the entrance of the cave. Tian could sense that the restrictive spell he had felt when he had entered the cave had been the most oppressive, while the restrictive spell he had felt inside the cave had been weaker. You're right. Jamming guessed what Tian was thinking about, and he smiled faintly and said, If we can find the hidden passageway of the cave layer by layer, it's indeed much easier than directly entering from the entrance of the cave. However, even if this is the case, the number of martial artists who can enter the 7th level of the cave is extremely few. Tian smiled bitterly and couldn't help but shake his head. No wonder after such a long time, almost no one could enter the 7th layer of cave. It turned out that the way to enter the cave was wrong. Jamming once hid the dragon's spring vein in the Thousand Demons Cave, so it wasn't strange that he was very familiar with the Thousand Demons Cave. Tian, let's go. Jamming smiled faintly and took the lead to enter the passageway. Tian let Lin Chen follow Jamming closely, and he stayed behind. The passageway was very narrow and could only accommodate one person. The 3 of them walked in front and behind. After walking for about 5,000 or 6,000 meters, Tian and the others finally saw the end of the passageway. We're out. Jamming was the first to walk out of the passageway. He smiled faintly and looked very relaxed. Tian and Lin Chun followed behind, and they were also very happy. At this time, they were in a cave on the 6th layer. Tian immediately felt that the restrictive spells in the space of the cave were much stronger than on the 5th layer. Fortunately, the three of them had top-notch talents, so the restrictive spells didn't affect them too much. Not long after the three of them walked out of the passageway behind them slowly closed up and returned to normal. The passageway on the 6th layer is much safer here. Tian smiled faintly, and he felt much more relaxed. They had left the original cave, so even if the Yi clan entered the cave, they wouldn't be able to find them. Tian examined the cave in front of him and didn't find anything strange. Next, he planned to use the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus to break through to the Paramount God Realm. Jiaming knew what Tian was thinking, and he smiled faintly and said, Tian, this cave is very safe. Just focus on breaking through. Tian nodded with a smile, then took out the 9 extremities and said to Lin Chun, Lin Chun, let's enter the 9 extremities. Lin Chun was stunned. Although he didn't know why Tian called him, he still nodded. The 9 extremities is indeed a good thing. Jiaming watched as Tian and Lin Chun disappeared, then looked at the 9 extremities floating in the air and smiled. He was very surprised by what kind of power Tian had obtained to be able to create a small world all by himself. It's very safe here. I'll go take a look and see if there's anything good in this cave. Jiaming didn't stand guard at the side, but turned around and walked into the depths of the cave. At the same time, in the 9 extremities, Tian and Lin Chun came to the Valley of the Demonic Lotus, and Fat Cat appeared. Lin Chun was startled by Fat Cat, but when he saw that the latter was not fierce, but very cute, he quickly got used to it. Next, Tian directly plucked a 9 Hearts Demon Lotus, placed it in his palm, and asked, Fat, what do we do now? Leave it to me. Fat Cat chuckled and used his fat paw to control the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus to float in front of him. Chapter 22-26. Fat Cat used the glazed light to cut open the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus. The heart of the Demon Lotus and the Demon Lotus 9 flames immediately separated. At this moment, the light on the heart of the Demon Lotus and the Demon Lotus 9 flames dimmed a lot at the same time. The heart of the Demon Lotus was the heart of the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus, and the Demon Lotus 9 flames was the 9 petals of the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus. Once the two fought, the life force of the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus instantly weakened, and the light naturally dimmed. Little guy, this thing is for you, eat it. Fat Cat laughed, and directly threw the heart of the Demon Lotus to Lin Chun. Lin Chun caught the heart of the Demon Lotus, and without saying anything, he directly swallowed it. Tian was suddenly stunned and immediately reacted. He wanted to stop Lin Chun, but it was already too late. The heart of the Demon Lotus of the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus contained such a terrifying power, and Lin Chun was a martial artist who had not even awakened his original spirit. Such a terrifying thing, directly swallowing it. Was it really okay? Don't worry. The 9 Primordial Divine Seal will absorb most of the power of the heart of the Demon Lotus. This little guy will be fine. Fat Cat, of course, knew what Tian was worried about, and said with a smile, Boom! However, just as his voice fell, Lin Chun's figure suddenly soared into the sky, rushed into the air, and stood there. Lin Chun was after all only 6 or 7 years old, and was so scared that he screamed, and his throat went numb. Tian was also stunned, and then looked at Lin Chun. Boom! At this moment, a terrifying power surged out of Lin Chun's body, and frantically circulated around his body, like a white flame, very strange. Such a strong power. Tian felt the power around Lin Chun, and couldn't help but frown, and his face instantly turned pale. He then looked at Fat Cat, and asked nervously, Fat, are you sure nothing will happen to Lin Chun? Believe me, this little guy will be fine. The Fat Cat chuckled confidently, then threw the demonic Lotus 9 flame to Tian and said, Go find a secluded place and absorb the power of this thing. I can absorb the demonic Lotus 9 flames directly? Tian was stunned, and his face froze. The fat cat laughed and said, "The nine flames demonic lotus is where the power of the nine hearts demonic lotus lies. For ordinary warriors, this is almost a fatal power. However, your martial body is very strong. It shouldn't be a problem for you to directly absorb the demonic lotus nine flames." Okay. Tian was speechless. He couldn't help but look at Lin Shan before turning around to leave. However, he immediately thought of something and asked, "Fat, the power of the demonic lotus nine flames is so strong. How long will it take for me to completely absorb it?" "About a month," the fat cat said indifferently, looking like she didn't care at all. "A month?" Tian exclaimed. He didn't think it would take so long to absorb the demonic lotus nine flame. "Kid, you're going to use the demonic lotus nine flame to break through to the paramount god stage. A month is like the speed of light." The fat cat also let out a strange cry, looking very displeased. Tian was stunned. After thinking about it carefully, he realized that the fat cat was right. He was going to break through to the paramount god stage, and a month was definitely going to be the limit. It should be noted that it was normal for ordinary warriors to go in a secluded cultivation for hundreds or even thousands of years to break through to the paramount god stage. Even those peerless geniuses would need years or even decades to break through to the paramount god stage. Tian needed only a month to break through to the paramount god stage. He was a freak among freaks. Tian didn't hesitate any longer. His figure flickered, and he left. Moments later, he arrived at a remote valley and entered it. Looking at the demonic lotus nine flame in his hand, Tian's eyes shone with a scorching light as he murmured, "Whether or not I can break through to the paramount god stage depends on you." Next, he sat down cross-legged, opened his mouth, and swallowed the demonic lotus nine flame. In the blink of an eye, he felt an explosive force exploding inside of him. The pain was so intense that he couldn't take it, and he let out a howl of agony. Following that, an even more intense pain struck Tian, causing his body to contort and his face to contort into a vicious expression. He felt like the explosive force inside of him had turned into countless flames that were battering madly inside of him. That intense pain made him feel as if his blood, bones, meridians, and everything else in his body were on fire and being burned away. This heart-wrenching pain was something that Tian had never imagined. His body trembled uncontrollably as his body continued to emit raging flames. His entire body was engulfed in flames, and his clothes were instantly burned to ashes, revealing his muscular body. However, this pain was only the beginning. Tian could clearly feel that the flames inside his body were growing stronger and stronger. He felt like every bone in his body was burning red. From the outside, it looked like his skin had turned crimson like burning steel. Through the crimson skin, one could clearly see his bones, blood, and meridians. Roar! Following this, the 9 dragon veins in his body began to tremble as if they were unable to withstand the burning of the 9 flames. They let out piercing cries. Tian was immersed in an indescribable, shocking pain, but his consciousness remained clear. He could faintly feel that amidst this immense pain, the power in his body was slowly growing stronger. This feeling of growing stronger slightly offset some of the pain, making him feel much more comfortable. Following this, as the power of the demonic Lotus 9 flames became more and more violent, the flames around Tian's body also burned more and more intensely. Those flames were very strange. They appeared to be 9 colors and looked extremely resplendent and gorgeous. The 9 Hearts demonic lotus was a rare flower of heaven and earth. At the same time, it absorbed the power of the 9 primordial forces of heaven and earth by relying on the demonic Lotus 9 flames. The demonic Lotus 9 flames had 9 petals. Each petal represented a type of primordial force of heaven and earth. The 9 petals erupted at the same time. That abundant power was simply unimaginably powerful. It was precisely by relying on the formidable power of the demonic Lotus 9 flames that Nietian could have the opportunity to assail the highest realm. Following this, after an unknown period of time, Nietian gradually felt the intense pain in his body gradually disappear. He was not too sure if it was because he had adapted to this kind of pain or if the demonic Lotus 9 Flames power was weakening. But he was very certain that the aura in his body was slowly growing stronger. This rate of growth was extremely fast, and he could feel it firsthand. In this state of constantly growing stronger, Nietian's entire person became much calmer. His breathing was calm and steady as he began to absorb the power of the demonic Lotus 9 Flames. Outside the canyon, Fat Cat watched this scene from afar. His tensed expression finally let out a long sigh of relief. In fact, he had been observing in the dark all this while. Nietian, your martial body is indeed abnormally powerful. Fat Cat murmured softly as his lips curled into a satisfied smile. He knew that the next step was for Nietian to slowly absorb the power of the demonic Lotus 9 Flames. There was nothing to worry about.